Chapter 186. I'll play with how. Qin Wanru glanced at the crowd with her clear eyes and made up her mind. She smiled and said, "Since Hao especially came to find me, I'll naturally play with him." Second sister, this is Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Yuru's face darkened and she said harshly, "I can play with him in Great Elder Princess's mansion. Why can't I play with him now? Is it because we are in Duke Xing's mansion?" Qin Wanru raised her head and looked at Qin Yuru with a faint smile, asking directly. The servant girl of Duke Xing's mansion originally wanted to persuade her, but when she heard Qin Wanru's words, she didn't know what to say. Duke Xing's mansion was prosperous, but in Great Elder Princess's mansion was noble. "Qin Wanru, what do you want to do now?" "This is Duke Xing's mansion." Qin Yuru approached Qin Wanru in a few steps. Regardless of the servants of Duke Xing's mansion beside her, she lowered her voice and said angrily to Qin Wanru, "If you really make trouble, no one can protect you." "What can happen to me? Collide with him again? Big sister is an adult, but you don't even know how to walk. Are you also worried that I don't know how to walk?" The smile on Qin Wanru's face became brighter, but her eyes were cold. Qin Yuru's face changed dramatically, and her hand, which was about to hold Qin Wanru's hand, trembled slightly. Although it was only for a moment, it still fell into Qin Wanru's eyes. As expected, there was something fishy about the collision between Qin Yuru and Xiao Yuanhao. Qin Wanru narrowed her eyes tightly. "What nonsense are you talking about? I don't understand what you are saying." Well, since you must accompany this little bully, I won't care about you." Qin Yuru took a step back and said angrily. She turned around and said to Qi Rongji, "Sister Rongji, since second sister doesn't want to walk with us, let's go." After saying that, she turned around and left angrily. Qi Rongji looked at Qin Wanru with a smile, and then looked at Qin Yuru. She slightly raised the corner of her eyes and followed Qin Yuru. The servant girl who led the way didn't know who to follow for the moment. She looked at Qin Wanru and said awkwardly, "Second Miss Qin, I am alone and can't lead the way in two directions." "I don't need it. You can lead the way for big sister." Qin Wanru smiled and looked at Xiao Yuanhao. "How, do you know the way in the mansion?" Hearing Qin Wanru's question, Xiao Yuanhao straightened his chest and said like an adult, "Don't worry, sister. I know the way. I will take you out." Seeing Qin Wanru and Xiao Wanru and Yuanhao, Xiao, the servant girl, left. Where is the place where you said you were going to take me to write?" Qin Wanru asked with a smile. She changed the topic about crickets with one sentence. "Sister, come with me. I'll show you." Xiao Yuanhao said proudly. "Young Master Hao, I'd better take you to see the crickets. That cricket is so big and powerful. It beat all the crickets from before." A manservant came up to stop him. "Master Hao, don't you like them the most?" Another servant immediately said. Xiao Yuanhao was a child after all. Hearing what they said, he hesitated again. He raised his delicate and beautiful little face and looked at Qin Wanru hesitantly. "Sister, do you like crickets?" "I don't like crickets. I just want to see the place to write big characters." "I haven't seen a place to write big characters." Qin Wanru glanced coldly at the two servants who were trying hard to encourage Xiao Yuanhao to play crickets. She smiled slightly. She didn't know who assigned these two servants to Xiao Yuanhao. Obviously, they didn't want Xiao Yuanhao to learn good things. Raising the disabled? Was that what they meant? It was said that Madame of Duke Xing was in charge of the whole Duke Xing's mansion. Everyone praised Madame of Duke Xing when they mentioned her. Did she really know nothing about the two servants of Xiao Yuanhao? Just now in front of everyone, Madame of Duke Xing treated Xiao Yuanhao better than her own son. Because of Xiao Yuanhao, Madame of Duke Xing apologized to Qin Yuru and even said that she would go to Xiao Yuanhao's mansion to apologize. However, she didn't ask about the details of the matter at that time and whether Xiao Yuanhao was right or not. Madame of Duke Xing put all the blame on Xiao Yuanhao without asking anything. She was so scheming. "Master Hao, A servant looked at Qin Wanru and wanted to say something, but was pushed away by Yu Jia. "What are you talking about? Our miss wants to play with Master Hao. Can't you let her?" Yu Jia said. "I dare not, but..." Seeing that the situation was not good, the other servant hurriedly explained. What's the but? When I was in Re and Great Elder Princess's mansion, Re and Great Elder Princess asked me to play with Master Hao more. Why can't I play with Master Hao here? Is there a big rule in Duke Xing's mansion, or are you two servants deliberately stirring up these things? Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the two servants coldly. She slightly raised the corner of her eyes and asked sharply. The two servants were dumbfounded. Although they had received the order not to let the second Miss Qin get in touch with their young master, the current situation was not something they could handle. For a moment, they looked at each other and panicked. Qin Wanru ignored them and said to Xiao Yunhao, "Let's go. How, go to write calligraphy for my sister." Okay, I'll go right now." Although Xiao Yunhao didn't understand what Qin Wanru said to the servants, he was happy that Qin Wanru was willing to accompany him. He immediately ran to lead the way. Qin Wanru and Yu Jie followed him. When the two servants saw that Master Hao had left, one of them gave the other a look. The other immediately understood and ran inside to report the news. The other chased after Master Hao and said, "Master Hao, wait a moment. This servant can't catch up with you." Seeing that someone chased after him, Xiao Yunhao became excited. He kicked the ground with his legs and ran faster. As he ran, he hid behind the rockery and rocks. After hiding, he peeped outside. When Qin Wanru and others approached him, he suddenly jumped out to scare them. The rocks and rockery were uneven. Seeing that Xiao Yunhao almost fell down again, Qin Wanru's face changed. She stood still and waved to Xiao Yunhao. Come here. I have something important to tell you." Xiao Yunhao was playing happily. He blinked his big eyes and ran to her, panting. Sister, what's the matter? How, have you always played like this with them?" Qin Wanru pointed at the servant beside her and asked. Although the servant was young, he was at least 10 years old. Compared with him, Xiao Yunhao couldn't run steadily. "Yes, it's fun." Xiao Yunhao raised his innocent eyes and looked at Qin Wanru blankly. His clear eyes softened Qin Wanru's heart. "So you purposely hit people and hurt yourself?" Qin Wanru asked softly. "Yes, purposely didn't pay attention. Sister." Xiao Yunhao stretched out his right hand and rolled up his cuff. There was a big scar on his chubby little arm, which almost made his little arm look ferocious. Qin Wanru couldn't help but gasp. "What a big wound. Did you fall?" Qin Wanru reached out and touched his little fat arm gently. She frowned slightly. "When I was running, I accidentally fell down. The ground was full of broken stones. It was very painful. Sister, breathe on it. Then it won't hurt anymore." Xiao Yunhao raised his little fat arm higher and looked like he was asking for comfort. Qin Wanru blew on his arm gently. The child immediately showed a big smile. He was so cute that only his teeth could be seen. "Sister, it doesn't hurt now. How? Has grown up and falls less often." So this child had fallen many times since he was a child. Sure enough, no one loved a child who had lost his parents. Although Duke Xing's mansion was a big family and had a lot of assets, no one really treated this little boy well. However, he was just a child. It was so easy for a few adults to deceive a child and lead him astray. He was the only legitimate son of the late heir of Duke Xing and the only grandson of Ru and Great Elder Princess. With these 2 points, Madam of Duke Xing must be a taboo. He pursed his thin lips silently, reached out and carefully helped him roll down his sleeves. "How? You can't run anymore in the future. It's not good to bump into others and it's not good to fall. If Hao were to be knocked down by someone while walking, would Hao be unhappy?" Xiao Yunhao's long eyelashes fluttered and he suddenly said obediently, "Sister, you are talking about the bad guys who hit me before, right? The bad guys hit me and I will be unhappy. So if I hit others, I will also be a bad guy, right?" "Yes, Hao is a good boy. So you should walk properly in the future. Don't run anymore." Qin Wanru reached out and gently pinched his pink little face and said with a smile, "Then you should walk properly in the future. I won't run anymore." Xiao Yunhao liked Qin Wanru very much. He didn't get angry when she pinched his little face gently. Instead, he said with a smile, The servant looked at Qin Wanru with fear and lowered his head, not daring to answer. In the past, if someone reached out to pinch Master Hao's face, he would be very lucky not to get angry. Even if old Madam of the mansion wanted to pinch Master Hao's face, she had to discuss with him first. How could he pinch Master Hao's face with a smile? How? Oh, you are an adult. You are so sensible. Qin Wanru praised him again. Her words made Xiao Yuanhao even prouder. He stuck out his chest and acted like an adult. He even shook his sleeves, looking calm and steady. Yu Jie couldn't help but laugh out loud. What's wrong with you? Xiao Yuanhao said. What's wrong with you? Chapter 187. The tall screen wall was right in the middle of the courtyard, blocking the buildings behind the courtyard tightly. On this screen wall, there were many characters, big and small, written in different fonts. Qin Wanru involuntarily approached it, and her eyes fell on the characters on it. The strokes were very strong, and it could be seen that the writer had amazing wrist strength. However, the characters were slightly different. It seemed that the writer started from the right side, and then wrote to the left side. The characters were getting more and more mature and better, and the strokes were vigorous and well-controlled. This was a screen wall for practicing calligraphy. Qin Wanru had heard that some children of aristocratic families would leave a screen wall in the corner of their courtyard to practice calligraphy. However, she had never heard of such a big screen wall, and it directly blocked the door. This momentum was not known by ordinary people. His gaze shifted from the shadow wall to the words on it. From the words on it, he could tell that the person who wrote it was definitely not an ordinary person. As his gaze landed on it, it was as if he could see a figure flashing across his mind. He seemed to be writing something at great speed. His back was tall and proud, and there was another slender figure walking over. Qin Wanru felt a headache as if it was about to split. She took 2 steps back, closed her eyes, and was about to fall. Seeing her fall, Yu Jie immediately held her and hurriedly called, Miss. Sister, what's wrong with you? Qin Wanru reached out to touch her head, and slowly opened her eyes. The sky above her head was blue, and the scene she saw just now was just an illusion. She calmed down, stood still with Yu Jie's hand, and looked at the screen wall again. There were just some excellent characters, and there was no man's proud figure or slim figure. Miss, are you okay? Yu Jie looked at Qin Wanru's pale face and asked. In just a moment, her delicate face immediately turned from pink to white as snow. How could she not panic? I'm fine. Qin Wanru forced a smile, took a deep breath, and suppressed the inexplicable sadness in her heart. Sister, are you really okay? Do you want to go in and have a rest? Except for the room in the middle, you can rest in other rooms. Xiao Yunhao pulled the corner of her clothes and said timidly. Qin Wanru suddenly fainted, which scared him. How, don't worry. I'm fine. Who wrote this? Qin Wanru asked. These are my father's words. They were all written by my father. I heard that my father had been practicing calligraphy since he was young. Sometimes he would practice here. These are all written by my father. Sister, take a look. Xiao Yuanhao took Qin Wanru's hand and led her to the back. The back was also full of words, but there was a very clean space in the corner. Sister, look, they said this is the place my father left for me to write. Xiao Yuanhao said proudly. Therefore, this was the place where the former heir of Xing State, who had died, lived. His father is really amazing. Looking at the little child trying to straighten his body in front of the words written by his father, Qin Wanru's nose was inexplicably sour, and there was an unspeakable sadness rushing out. Biting her lips to suppress the palpitation in her heart, Qin Wanru's voice became softer. Did Hao come here with ink just now to write? Xiao Yunhao said and looked around deliberately. Finding no one else came, he got close to Qin Wanru and whispered, Grandma didn't allow Hao to come here, but Hao still wanted to come here. Grandma had no choice but to let Hao come here every few days, and he was not allowed to touch the things here. She said my father would be angry if he damaged them. Then why did you let Hao come here to write this time? Qin Wanru asked calmly. She didn't allow him to come here in the past, so she naturally wouldn't allow him to come here to write. However, he came here with a bucket of ink just now. It was obvious that he wanted to come here to write. They said I could come here secretly to write a few words. This was originally left by my father. He said that I would live in Grandma's place recently. If I didn't write a few words here, what if someone robbed this place in the future? This place is ours. My father left it to me and I won't lose it. Xiao Yuanhao's little face tightened, and his little fists were clenched. It seemed that this place was all his, and no one was allowed to rob it. So, it was the two servants who deceived him, and then they met Qin Yuru. Then they bumped into Qin Yuru and made such a farce. Qin Wanru had sorted out the whole thing in her mind, but she still had a question. Why did Qin Yuru make life difficult for a child? Moreover, this child's identity was not someone she could afford to offend. She looked at Xiao Yuanhao with pity, patted his head gently, and squatted down. How should eat well, study well, and write well. In the future, you will be able to write as many words as your father. Before he had the ability to get what he deserved, saying such words was actually the source of his sin. Xiao Yuanhao's eyes lit up. When he was about to say something, he seemed to think of something. He lowered his head, twisted his body, and said, "But how can't write well now?" "Why can't how write?" Qin Wanru asked in surprise. Even if he didn't go to school, a child of his age should have learned early. How hasn't learned to write, so he writes casually. Xiao Yuanhao seemed to feel embarrassed, and his little face blushed. He became more bashful and said softly. So there was no one to teach him at all. His so-called writing was probably just a few scribbles, right? Now she could basically be sure that Duke Xing's mansion seemed to treat this child well on the surface, and everyone seemed to love him very much. But in fact, they wanted to raise this child to be disabled. Outsiders only thought that Duke Xing's mansion raised a bully who couldn't be educated, but they didn't think that there was no one to educate him at all. How could he be educated? She pursed her lips. She couldn't remember whether she had seen Xiao Yuanhao in her last life, and didn't know what happened to him later. But looking at his current situation, if he went on like this, he could only be raised to be disabled. When you go back, tell Grandma that you can learn to write. If you write well, I will come here with you to write together with your fathers, and make him happy, okay? Qin Wanru asked softly. Xiao Yuanhao's gloomy eyes lit up immediately, and he laughed loudly. Okay, sister, you can come here to write with me in the future. Don't see that bad person and don't let her write. At this moment he remembered Qin Yuru again. Okay, as long as you write well, I will accompany you to write, and let you compare with father. Maybe you can write better. Qin Wanru said with a smile. Sister, I will take you in to have a look. Father's things are there. Xiao Yuanhao pointed to the back and said. At this time, they had entered the yard. How do you know? Qin Wanru asked curiously. How sneaked in. There is a window there, and how secretly loosened it so you can go in. Xiao Yuanhao's voice became more and more light, and he looked at his servant. His voice was so low that only Qin Wanru could hear it, which meant that only he knew. He will find it. Qin Wanru touched the child's head and said, Drive him away, and then let's go in. Xiao Yuanhao was eager to take Qin Wanru to see the good things he found, so he pulled the corner of Qin Wanru's clothes and said, Second Miss Qin. Before Qin Wanru answered, Madame of Duke Xing came out from behind the screen wall. She looked at Qin Wanru coldly, and the gentle smile in front of others disappeared. Surrounded by a large group of people, she looked amazing. Madame of Duke Xing. Qin Wanru went forward calmly, bowed to Madame of Duke Xing, and then stood aside. Xiao Yuanhao also ran over and called her second aunt intimately. I told you not to go out, but why are you so disobedient? You even brought a guest here. If your grandmother knows it, she will be angry again. Madame of Duke Xing glanced at the tightly locked door, and her face became a little calmer, and she said softly to Xiao Yuanhao. Her words seemed to remind Xiao Yuanhao of something bad, and his face turned a little pale, but he still pouted slightly and said, But I want to see it with my sister. You have seen it, and there is nothing to see. Go back. Madame of Duke Xing's voice became more and more gentle, with a smile in her eyes. But I still want to take my sister in to have a look. Xiao Yuanhao twisted his body uneasily and said, Just now Nanny Chu in Great Elder Princess's mansion was looking for you. If you go out again, Nanny Chu will be worried to death. Before returning to the mansion, didn't and Great Elder Princess tell you not to go out and to listen to Nanny Chu? Madam of Duke Xing coaxed him. Yes, she did. Xiao Yuanhao lowered his head shyly. He did not listen to his grandmother's words, and his grandmother would be sad if she said it. Then go to find Nanny Chu first, okay? Madam of Duke Xing said. Xiao Yuanhao wanted to go, but he was worried about Qin Wanru. He looked up at Qin Wanru and wanted to shake his head again. How, go to find Nanny Chu. I have something to do, and I will come to see you in Great Elder Princess's mansion next time. Qin Wanru comforted him. Is it true? You said it last time, but you didn't come for so long. Xiao Yuanhao pouted his pink lips and muttered. It must be true this time, so I came to see how, Qin Wanru smiled. Then Pinky swear with how, Xiao Yuanhao reached out his little fat hand and gestured to Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru helplessly reached out her thin little finger and gently hooked his little fat finger. How, can you go back now? Sister, remember to find how, Xiao Yuanhao was taken away reluctantly and looked back 3 times at every step. Second Miss Qin, the banquet is about to start. Let's talk on the way. Madam of Duke Xing looked at Qin Wanru's smiling face and said very politely with a smile. Madam of Duke Xing, please. Qin Wanru's eyes remained unchanged and she said naturally and gracefully, with a faint ripple in her eyes. Chapter 188. Second Miss Qin, how is still young. If he has offended you, please forgive him. But it is very inappropriate for him to bring Second Miss Qin here because he is not sensible. Madam of Duke Xing said lightly as she walked out. She meant that Xiao Yuanhao was still young and Qin Wanru was older than him. It was very impolite for her to follow him in. Was this the reason why Madam of Duke Xing came here in a hurry? He turned his body slightly and looked at the courtyard behind him without batting an eyelid. This was a grand courtyard, but the owner of the courtyard was no longer here. Even so, the courtyard still retained its old appearance. It could be seen how much the manor valued the original owner of the courtyard. Madam, you are right. I don't know that people can't come in here. Qin Wanru said softly with a strange look flashing in her eyes. This is a forbidden area in the mansion. Even the people in the mansion can't come in casually. How is not sensible, so he comes in from time to time. Madam of Duke Xing's face became more and more gentle. She looked at Qin Wanru and said, This child is congenial to you. I guess you saved him that day. Madam, you are exaggerating. Qin Wanru said calmly. How grew up in the mansion since he was a child. He is the only child left. How can she not care about him? Old Madam kept him in her mouth and was afraid that he would melt. She held him in her palm and was afraid that he would fall off. She did everything for him in the mansion. Unexpectedly, he almost had an accident when he went out to attend a banquet. Madam of Duke Xing said sincerely. Qin Wanru didn't answer this time. What Madam of Duke Xing needed was a listener at this time. And Great Elder Princess wants to take Hao away now. I am afraid that Hao can't get used to living here. Madam of Duke Xing said with a sigh. She slightly tilted her head and looked at Qin Wanru, who was a step behind her. She said, I heard that second Miss Qin's biological mother is not Madame Shui. I wonder who her biological mother is? Her words changed a little fast. Fortunately, Qin Wanru had prepared for it. She slightly lowered her head to hide the cold look in her eyes. I don't know about my biological mother. My father doesn't allow me to ask more. Is your biological mother dead? Madam of Duke Xing said with pity in her eyes. What a poor child. Although her previous words were abrupt, the latter sentence was enough to make people feel that she was compassionate and kind. Wanru doesn't know. Qin Wanru frowned. Have you never seen your biological mother? Madam of Duke Xing asked with concern and a soft look. Qin Wanru shook her head gently and whispered, Father, mother and grandmother love me very much. What a pitiful and sensible child. Madame of Duke Xing sighed and said with her eyes falling on the embroidery pattern on her clothes, "The embroidery pattern is really beautiful. I saw that the three misses from your Qin's mansion all have such embroidery pattern. Who came up with this kind of embroidery pattern?" Wanru doesn't know. It was made in the sewing room. Qin Wanru shook her head again. The 3 sets of clothes were all made by the sewing room? Madame of Duke Xing frowned and asked seemingly casually, as if she was really a little curious about this matter. "All of them. When we just arrived in the capital city, grandmother asked someone to make clothes for us. Miss Qi happened to live in our mansion, so they made clothes together. But the orchid pattern..." Qin Wanru hesitated when she said this. It seemed that she thought of something, but she stopped talking on second thought. "How about the orchid pattern?" Wanru seems to have seen this orchid pattern somewhere. Qin Wanru gently rubbed her forehead, but she couldn't remember at the moment. "Where did you see it?" Although Madame of Duke Xing looked calm, her voice was unconsciously a little heavier. Qin Wanru raised her eyes and looked at her tightly closed lips. Her eyes became more and more deep. "Wanru can't remember, but I should have seen it before. Maybe in Magistrate Qi's mansion, or in our mansion, or in a family in Jiangzhou." Qin Wanru said. "Jiangzhou, that was to say, in Jiangzhou." "Second Miss Qin, do you have a glazed lamp in your mansion?" Taking a deep breath, Madame of Duke Xing suppressed the palpitation in her heart and asked. Wanru is not sure. Qin Wanru's clear eyes showed doubt and she opened her mouth slightly. While they were talking, several madams turned out in front of them. Seeing Madame of Duke Xing and Qin Wanru walk over, they stood on the roadside and waited for them to pass. Then they walked forward together, talking and laughing. Qin Wanru was originally walking beside Madame of Duke Xing, but she gradually fell behind the crowd. Looking at Madame of Duke Xing, who was smiling gently in front of her, a trace of malice flashed in her eyes. She was now sure that Madame of Duke Xing knew the orchid seal, and this orchid seal was hers. Could it be assumed that in the last life, Qin Yuru used this orchid seal to climb up to Duke Xing's mansion, but she didn't know what this orchid seal represented? Why did Duke Xing's mansion think highly of this seal? And the degree to which they thought highly of it was a taboo for Madame of Duke Xing. She couldn't say that the seal was hers yet. Before she figured out the truth of the matter, she had to move forward slowly, step by step. Any carelessness could cause her to fall into a state of eternal damnation. Madame of Duke Xing led the crowd directly to the banquet place. The banquet was held in the garden of Duke Xing's mansion, surrounded by long curtains that were lifted high to block the wind. A large chrysanthemum garden was in the banquet place. It was the time when chrysanthemums were in full bloom, so this place was almost a sea of chrysanthemums. Many people came to this sea of flowers and praised the chrysanthemum appreciation party held by Duke Xing's mansion. The whole capital city knew that Duke Xing's mansion had a chrysanthemum garden that other mansions didn't have. Such a large area of chrysanthemums was not only beautiful, but also had a variety of chrysanthemums, many of which couldn't be found outside. Qin Wanru stood in front of a cluster of flowers and stopped. Her eyes fell on a few small flowers on the edge of the cluster of flowers. Those flowers didn't look like chrysanthemums, and they were small. They seemed to be random and sporadic wildflowers. But in this place, the possibility of this kind of wildflower was really small. She gently picked up the corner of her skirt, squatted down, and carefully looked at those small, almost inconspicuous flowers. She always felt that she had forgotten something in her mind. "Miss, these flowers can be used as medicine." Seeing Qin Wanru squatting down, Yujia also squatted down. After looking at those small flowers curiously, she said in surprise. Hearing what she said, Qin Wanru suddenly remembered that these plants with small flowers were indeed a kind of medicine. She had been thinking about flowers just now, but she thought in the wrong direction. It can clear the heart and clear the eyes, and it's also good for health. Qin Wanru reached out to touch these small flowers and looked around. It was almost a sea of flowers around. It was really not something that ordinary people could do to raise these chrysanthemums so well and keep these plants with medicinal properties. Duke Xing's mansion really took a lot of pains to raise these chrysanthemums. "Second sister, did you have a good time?" Qin Yuru's voice sounded in Qin Wanru's ears. Qin Wanru raised her head and clapped her hands. Then she stood up and looked behind her. Not only Qin Yuru, but also Countess Yong and several other madams and misses. Qi Rongji was the last one. She looked very pitiful and seemed to be excluded. Not bad, Qin Wanru said with indifferent eyes. Where is Master Hao? Why doesn't he play with you? Qin Yuru said with a faint smile. She just didn't like Qin Wanru. Even if she repeatedly warned herself not to make trouble, she couldn't suppress the anger she had suffered before. She didn't believe that Qin Wanru could know that she deliberately hit that child. Hao went back first. Big sister, have you seen my mother? Qin Wanru said lightly. How do I know where Madame Shui is? Qin Yuru said unhappily. She didn't want to be with Shui Rulin. Who cared where Shui Rulin was now? Mother hasn't come yet. I'll go to find her. Qin Wanru looked around and didn't find Shui Rulin coming. She said, Mother has been in poor health. If it weren't for us today, she wouldn't have come. After saying that, she raised her eyebrows and looked at Qi Rongji who came over. Sister Wanru, I'll go with you to find her. Qi Rongji finally got a chance to speak and said hurriedly. Just now, she and Qin Yuru didn't go far before they met people from Duke Yong's mansion. After that, people from Duke Yong's mansion only talked to Qin Yuru and didn't even give her a chance to speak. How could she not be depressed? Qin Yuru was originally unwilling to go with them. But seeing that both of them went to find her, it would be too much if she didn't go with them. She could only secretly bite her teeth and force a smile on her face. Then let's go together. So the three of them asked for the direction of the flower hall and went to it. On the way, they met Shui Rulin, so they turned back together. The seats had been arranged in advance. The seats of Qin's mansion were neither too close to the front nor too close to the back. This arrangement was very appropriate. What was inappropriate was that Countess Yong was looking at her coldly across the table. Coincidentally, Countess Yong was face to face with her. Seeing Qin Wanru turn to look at her, Countess Yong snorted coldly and looked annoyed. Qin Wanru rolled her eyes and didn't seem to mind at all. She even smiled at Countess Yong, which made Countess Yong's face darker. What happened in and Great Elder Princess's mansion made her feel ashamed to see others, and all of this was caused by Qin Wanru. A servant girl came to her ear and whispered a few words. She looked at Qin Wanru calmly, nodded, and gave a few orders in a low voice. The servant girl retreated respectfully and then stood outside the hall. She said something to an old maid who was guarding there. The old maid also looked at Qin Wanru and then retreated silently. People came and went at the banquet. No one would pay attention to the things between a servant girl and an old maid, but Qin Wanru saw it and couldn't help but be vigilant. The last old maid glanced at her. She saw it clearly and her eyes became colder. Chapter 189. At their table, Qin Wanru sat close to Shui Rulin, Qin Yuru was next to Qin Wanru, and then Qi Rongji. Since they came from the same mansion, they naturally sat together. Qin Yuru didn't want to talk to Qin Wanru, so she turned to Qi Rongji. Although she also hated Qi Rongji now, at least she was much better than Qin Wanru. Qin Yuru didn't talk to her, and Qin Wanru certainly wouldn't ask for a snub, so she simply ignored her and talked to Shui Rulin from time to time. The dishes were prepared early, and the speed of serving was very fast. After serving the dishes, the servant girls retreated in an orderly manner. The direction of serving the dishes was behind Qin Wanru, and then went around to a madam in front of Shui Rulin to serve the dishes. Finally, a fruit plate was served. At this time, it was the harvest time. There were a lot of fruits on the plate, including a few round fruits. Maybe it was because the fruit plate was too heavy or the servant girl was too thin. When she passed by Qin Wanru, her hand was crooked, and a fruit hit Qin Wanru's head before it was put on the table. Qin Wanru was talking to Shui Rulin when her head was hit. She immediately uttered, "Ouch," and touched her head. "Miss? I'm sorry." Seeing that the fruit fell on Qin Wanru, the servant girl hurriedly stretched out a hand and seemed to want to rub Qin Wanru's head. She held the fruit plate with two hands, and when she loosened one hand, the fruit plate was immediately unstable and fell down in the direction of Qin Wanru. However, Yu Jie on the side was faster and pushed her hard. So this time the fruit fell on Qin Yuru, and Qin Wanru and Qi Rongji also slightly missed it. Qi Rongji reacted quickly and hurriedly jumped away. Only the corner of her skirt was slightly stained with water, and most of the fruit fell on Qin Yuru. Shui Rulin was shocked and was about to get up. Qin Wanru didn't care about the embarrassment on her head, and immediately took her hand and comforted her. "Mother, don't move." She glanced at a few small round fruits on the ground. The small fruits were about the same size, but if stepped on, it was easy to fall. "How dare you!" Qin Yuru was stunned to see the water stains on her new clothes. She was furious. She had just put on this set of clothes not long ago. Plop! The servant girl who delivered the fruit plate immediately knew that it was not good. She hurriedly knelt down and loudly begged for mercy. "Please forgive me, Mrs. Please forgive me." Qin Yuru's face was livid with anger. She suddenly stood up and seemed to want to scold the servant girl. Unexpectedly, she stepped on something round and slippery. She lost her balance and fell towards Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru was prepared for this. She reached out to help her and said in a low voice, "Big sister, be careful. Mother's body can't bear being hit." Qin Yuru held Qin Wanru's hand to steady herself. She opened her mouth to scold Qin Wanru, but when she saw the courtyard full of guests, she knew it was not the right time. He turned his head to look at the trembling servant girl who was still kneeling on the ground and begging for mercy. His voice was almost squeezed out from between his teeth. "Do you know how to serve the fruit platter? If you don't know, get someone else to do it. Young miss, please spare this servant, please spare this servant." The servant girl kowtowed heavily to Qin Yuru with a look of panic and uneasiness. After a few kowtows, a bruise immediately appeared on her forehead. It was obvious that she really used her strength to kowtow. "Yuru, forget it," Shui Rulin said softly. As a guest, no matter what, they could not directly punish the servants of others' mansion. Moreover, they were from Duke Xing's mansion. They could not punish them at will. "How can I forget it? I can't wear these clothes." Qin Yuru reached out to point at her clothes and said sullenly. The water stains on the clothes were very obvious. Several pieces were connected together, which was really not decent. In fact, not only Qin Yuru, but also Qin Wanru. She had to stand in front of Shui Rulin, so she could not avoid it. "I'll ask someone to get clothes for you later. Just change," Shui Rulin said in a low voice and looked around. Although the noise here was loud, because there were many tables in the banquet, no one found the table in the middle. Now it seemed that they could only do this. Qin Yuru clenched her teeth with hatred, afraid that she could not control herself and wanted to slap the servant girl several times. "Find a supervisor here and take them to change clothes," Shui Rulin told the servant girl. Hearing Shui Rulin's words, the servant girl felt as if she had been pardoned. She hurriedly kowtowed to them 3 times, stood up, and ran out in a hurry without even picking up the fruit plate. After a while, she came back with an old maid of Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Wanru glanced at the old maid calmly. It was the old maid who had secretly glanced at her several times when Countess Yong asked the servant girl to pass the message. If it was just an accident, then she really lived 2 lives in vain. "Mrs., please come with me. There is a special courtyard for guests to rest over there. You can change clothes there." The old maid came up and apologized first. Then she reached out and pointed to the right rear. There was indeed a row of houses on the edge of the sea of flowers. It was a little far away and could not be seen clearly. The 2 servant girls went to get clothes. Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru followed the old maid to rest there. Shui Rulin was worried and wanted to go with them, but was refused by Qin Wanru. She gently pinched Shui Rulin's hand to reassure her. The 2 followed the old maid to the right rear. There were so many people coming and going, so no one noticed this episode. Of course, some people who should pay attention to it still noticed it. Madame of Duke Xing calmly bent her lips, restrained her eyes, and still talked and laughed with a madam beside her. No one noticed that she had actually paid attention to the movement over there. Countess Yong's eyes were cold, and her eyes followed their figures. After a while, she snorted softly and then turned her eyes away. What would happen next was out of her control. Anyway, it had nothing to do with her. This was a relatively large guest courtyard with a good scenery. Standing at the gate of the courtyard, they could see that there were 5 or 6 wing rooms on the left and right. Together with several rooms in the main room, there were indeed a lot of rooms. Mrs., please go inside and have a rest. When the 2 servant girls come over, you can change clothes. After the banquet is over, I will report this matter to our madam, and she will punish the servant girls severely. The old maid pointed at the empty courtyard with a smile and said, Chin Wanru looked at the yard calmly and found that there were also chrysanthemums in the yard. Although the number of chrysanthemums was much less than that outside, there were many varieties. The small flower bed in the middle of the yard formed a beautiful scenery. In addition, it was quiet, very quiet. Compared with the banquet outside, this was really a quiet and leisurely place. Today's banquet was held in the chrysanthemum garden, but the real place was far away from here. Basically, no one would come here. The so-called resting place for the guests was actually just a saying. After the banquet, all the guests would basically leave. If they were really close friends, they would not rest in this deserted corner. Looking outside, this courtyard should be close to the wall of Duke Xing's mansion, and the high wall was behind the courtyard wall. Looking inside, there was a big tree on the right side of the flower bed. Under the tree, there was a stone table and 4 stone stools. There was also a plate of fruit, a teapot and 2 teacups on the table. It looked very quiet and peaceful. Let's go over there and sit and wait for a while. Chin Yuru pointed and said. Chin Wanru stopped and said, I'll take a look here and then go over. Oh, whatever. There was no one else here, so Chin Yuru did not suppress her temper. She turned and entered the courtyard alone, and went to the stone table. She walked to the table and sat down. Reaching out to touch the teapot, she found it was still hot, so she poured a cup for herself. The color of the tea was light green, and at first glance, she knew it was good tea. She immediately took a sip and felt that the aftertaste was endless. She squinted at Chin Wanru, sneered, turned away, and continued to drink the tea. It had nothing to do with her whether Chin Wanru was willing to come in or not. Then I'll go back first. Mrs., come back after changing your clothes. The old maid said with a smile. Wait a minute. Chin Wanru frowned, reached out to pinch her earlobe and said, Did you see my earring? I didn't see it. When the old maid saw the ruby earring hanging on one of Chin Wanru's ears, and the other ear was empty, she panicked for a moment. What should I do? This is the new earring that Grandma just bought for me. Did the servant girl take it just now? When she threw the fruit on my head, I felt that she touched me. Chin Wanru frowned tightly, and her face was not very good. Of course, no one would look good in this situation. This can't be. The old maid hurriedly shook her head and said, Then where is my earring? I don't know. The old maid panicked and rolled her eyes. She originally wanted to leave according to the plan, but she did not expect such a thing to happen in this bone formation eye. Will you accompany me to look for it? If you can't find it, report it to your madam and explain it. Chin Wanru narrowed her eyes and said, But there are still water stains on your clothes. Do you want to change first and then look for it? The old maid looked at a large water stain on Chin Wanru's cuff and carefully suggested. You can't find it in a while. Chin Wanru shook her head without any hesitation, turned around and walked out. Their voices were not low, and Chin Yuru had been listening carefully. At this time, she sneered and secretly mocked Chin Wanru for being so petty. She lost an earring and didn't even have time to change her clothes. She actually went out to look for it, which was really shameful. However, this had nothing to do with her. She had better hope that everyone would see Chin Wanru's embarrassing look. The old maid was a little flustered. If you don't go, I will look for it myself. Chin Wanru saw her expression and turned to leave. I will go with you. Seeing that she left, the old maid had to follow her. They walked while looking for it and slowly walked away. The courtyard became quiet again. Bored, Chin Yuru poured herself another cup of tea and drank it. The tea was very good, and its fragrance lingered in her mouth and teeth. She reached out to pull her dress and found a large wet spot, which happened to be in front of her. Why was there so much water in the fruit plate, and most of it had spilled on her? Chapter 190. Just at the end of the wing room near her, the door suddenly opened, and a handsome man in a snow-colored undergarment appeared at the door. When he saw Chin-Yuru sitting in front of the stone bench with her overskirt lifted, he was stunned for a moment, and then he let out a sharp scream of horror and hid in the room. Chin-Yuru froze and looked at the scene in front of her in astonishment. For a moment, she didn't know how to react. Originally, she also wanted to scream, but the man beat her to it, so she didn't have time to react. The opposite wing room became quiet again, as if no one had ever been there. There was someone here, and it was a man. Chin-Yuru suddenly came to her senses, stood up, and turned to run. Suddenly, the back of her head went black, and she fell on the stone table. A person who looked like a guard appeared behind her. After knocking her out, the guard walked to the door of the previous room, gently knocked on the door and whispered, "Master." "What's the matter?" A cold voice came from inside. "Marquis called me over for something just now." The guard also began to have cold sweat on his head. He didn't expect that he just left for a while, and how could a woman come into the courtyard, dressed like this, and drink the master's tea? Chin-Yuru's skirt was lifted just now, so the guard didn't see clearly. He thought that she came to seduce the master because her clothes were untidy. "Do you know which mansion she comes from?" The voice inside asked coldly. "I don't know, I haven't seen her." The guard shook his head. "Throw her at the back door." The voice behind the door paused and said, not knowing Chin-Yuru's identity, the master inside also had scruples. Some of the madams and misses who came to the banquet today were not ordinary. If they really made trouble, it would not be good for Duke Xing's mansion or him. If it was really some distinguished and extraordinary misses, he couldn't really do it, and this woman didn't see him. However, since she ruined his plan, he didn't intend to let her go so easily. "Yes, I'll do it in a minute." The guard already knew what to do, and immediately nodded. The door opened, and the handsome man from before walked out with a pale face. Behind him was a man wearing a cloak. The brim of the cloak was down, so his face could not be seen clearly. The man in the cloak walked up to Chin-Yuru and looked at her face. He did not recognize her, so he snorted and kicked the stone stool over. The guard was so scared that he lowered his head, knowing that his master was angry. The mysterious man remembered her face in his heart. He couldn't do it this time, but it didn't mean that he wouldn't have a chance next time. After looking at her face, he turned around and walked to the back. There was a small door at the back, and it was not far from the back door of Duke Xing's mansion. After he and the elegant man left Duke Xing's mansion quietly, the guard came over and picked up Chin-Yuru, who had fainted just now. He half-carried her and took her to the door of the backyard of Duke Xing's mansion. After opening the door halfway, he threw her in the door and turned to leave quickly. When Qin Wanru followed the old maid back, she saw Mei Shui and Yu Jie walking back from a distance, so she and the old maid went to greet them. "Miss, why did you come out?" Yu Jie's eyes flickered and she asked cleverly. "My earring is missing. I couldn't find it after looking for it." Qin Wanru said, "How could it be missing? I'll help you find it." Yu Jie looked panicked, but she was relieved in her heart. She was worried about Qin Wanru before, so she took the clothes and ran back in a hurry. She remembered clearly that the young Miss's earrings were still there when she left. "Second Miss, where is our Miss?" Mei Shui followed Yu Jie and ran very hurriedly. She didn't dare not to run. If Second Miss's clothes arrived and she didn't get hers, she would be punished after returning to the mansion. "Your Miss went in alone and waited in the yard to drink tea." Qin Wanru pointed casually and said. Mei Shui looked in that direction and hurriedly separated from them and went to the yard. Qin Wanru continued to look for her Miss with the old maid and servant girls. The weather in autumn was dry. After going back and forth, the water stains on the dress were almost dry. When they were about to return to the banquet, Mei Shui rushed to them with a pale face. People at the banquet were enjoying the flowers and drinking at the same time. They were very comfortable. Suddenly seeing a servant girl rushing to them, they immediately knew that something had happened. They all whispered to each other to ask which mansion this servant girl came from. Mei Shui's face was as pale as snow. She was so flustered that she couldn't care about her own behavior. She ran behind Qin Wanru and said, "Second Miss, First Miss is missing." This sentence was clearly heard by the people at the nearby banquet table. Some people stood up in shock. Something must have happened. A mist suddenly disappeared. The noise this time was so big that even Madame of Duke Xing, who was far away, heard the news immediately. She immediately stood up and rushed over with a few servant girls and old maids. Seeing Madame of Duke Xing stood up, other madams and misses who followed her also stood up and came to Qin Wanru. Countess Yong, who was outside the crowd, saw that Qin Wanru was here but Qin Yuru was not. Her face suddenly darkened. Big sister was with me just now. How could she not be here? Qin Wanru narrowed her eyes, turned to look at the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion and said, "When we left just now, did big sister sit under that tree and drink tea?" "Yes, yes, I saw it clearly. It is true," the old maid said repeatedly. "How could that person disappear?" Mei Shui cried out in panic. "Let's go and have a look," Qin Wanru said decisively and turned to leave. "What happened?" The voice of Madame of Duke Xing came from behind the crowd, and everyone immediately made way for them. "Madame of Duke Xing, just now a servant girl of your mansion overturned the fruit plate on Big Sister and me, making our clothes wet. The servant girl asked this nanny to take us to change clothes. When we walked to the yard, I found that the earring was missing, so I came back to look for it. Big Sister stayed in the yard alone to drink tea, but now the servant girl said that she was missing." Qin Wanru listened to the old maid's question and told the story in a very orderly way. The meaning in her words was also clear. If there was an accident, Duke Xing's mansion could hardly get rid of the responsibility, and the cause was the people of Duke Xing's mansion. Which servant girl? Madame of Duke Xing's face darkened. "I don't know her. Just now a servant girl came to ask me to take these two misses to change clothes. There were so many people at that time, and I didn't recognize her. I just wanted to take these two misses there as soon as possible." The old maid replied in a hurry. A servant girl she didn't know? If she went in at that time, the old maid would not be able to find them, and then there would be no evidence to prove what she said at that time. Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes slightly and glanced at the old maid calmly. Although the old maid was flustered, her expression and behavior were somewhat orderly. Qin Wanru's eyes became gloomy for a moment. "Let's go and look for her. Maybe she didn't see clearly." Madame of Duke Xing saw that she could not ask anything, so she could only say. A large group of people followed her back to the remote courtyard. Once they entered the courtyard, everyone helped to look for her. How could a person disappear in such a good condition? Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the stone stool that Qin Yuru had been sitting on. The stone stool looked normal, but she clearly remembered that there was a small plum-shaped stone on the side of the stone stool facing her. Now the plum-shaped stone was turned over to the inside side. Of course, Qin Yuru would not do such a thing, and even if she wanted to move it, she could not move it. Looking at those quiet and peaceful wing rooms, it seemed that there was no difference from just now. "Miss, the door of that room is not locked." Yujia stood beside Qin Wanru and lowered her voice. When she followed Mingxiu Nun that day, she especially used this method to confuse people. The door lock was put on it, but it did not mean that the door was locked. It was just that the lock was put on the door frame. At first glance, it seemed that the door was really locked. Qin Wanru could be sure that there was something wrong with the door. But this matter had nothing to do with her, so she just glanced at it and then turned away. She gently pinched Yujia's hand. Yujia understood and also turned away, as if she did not find the strangeness of this wing room at all. Found it at the back door?" Someone shouted behind the room. Everyone hurriedly turned around and saw that the back door of this courtyard was not far from the back door of Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Yuru, whose clothes were turned up in a mess, was lying on the ground, motionless. Mei Shui rushed over in shock and shouted anxiously, First miss, what's wrong with you?" She put her hand under her nose and felt relieved when she felt her breath. Qin Yuru was awakened by a sharp cry. She opened her eyes and saw a bunch of faces in front of her, and then closed her eyes again. She felt a dull pain in her head, as if she had been hit by something. First miss, wake up, wake up." Seeing her wake up, Mei Shui was overjoyed. Qin Yuru opened her eyes again. This time, She saw the people in front of her clearly. For a moment, she widened her eyes in astonishment, and her lips trembled. She turned her head left and right, and suddenly remembered the screaming man in white underwear she saw. Where is he? She almost said these words in a murmur. Miss, who else is there? There's no one else here. Are you dizzy? Mei Shui saw her and hurriedly reminded her loudly. This place was so hidden that there would be no one. If Qin Yuru really wanted to see someone, he must not be a good person in this place. It was even easy to suspect another aspect. Where is he? Qin Yuru was still confused and did not understand what Mei Shui meant. She was stunned and said in panic. She did not understand what was going on until now. Chapter 191. Looking outside, there was no one at all. Everyone looked at each other, not knowing the reason for this. Thinking of the first Miss Qin's messy clothes just now, could it be that someone had disobeyed the rules and knocked first Miss Qin unconscious after discovering that someone had come? Thinking about it, it seemed that there was only one possibility. Otherwise, she would not look for someone in a panic. They really did not know whether to say that the first Miss Qin was lucky or unlucky. Fortunately, it seemed that it was not a big deal. Everyone present had sharp eyes. Although the clothes were messy, they did not really fall. However, it would not be a good thing for anyone to get involved in this kind of thing. Especially for this kind of young girl, her reputation would always be tarnished. Help the first Miss Qin up quickly. It's good that she is fine. Madame of Duke Xing said as if nothing had happened, and asked someone to help Qin Yuru up. At this time, Qin Yuru had also completely woken up. When she was surrounded by people and saw the wing room, she made a terrified sound and could not say anything for a while. First Miss Qin, do you have anything to say? Did you see something that you are afraid of? Tell us and let us help you to evaluate it together. Madame of Duke Xing asked with a smile and a kind look. However, Qin Yuru could not say a word. She could not say that she saw a man in underwear. For the sake of her reputation, she could only say that she did not see anything. Thank you, madam. I just drank tea here and then fainted. Qin Yuru looked pale and said in a trembling voice. Madam, please check whether there is anyone here. Qin Wanru stood still and said quietly. No one will come here. The womenfolk are also at the banquet just now. If it is. Speaking of this, Madame of Duke Xing hesitated for a moment. Obviously, she thought that it was not the womenfolk. Qin Yuru's hand trembled. She grabbed Madame of Duke Xing's hand and said in a panic, There is no need to check. That person should have escaped from the back door, so he is definitely not from your mansion. She was afraid that Madame of Duke Xing would really investigate it. Although she had only seen the person before, she could tell from his sharp scream that he was not a child from an aristocratic family. If she really found out that there was such a person, and he was just a servant, how could she end this matter? Qin Yuru would rather not find this person. Her panicked look was seen by others, and they only felt more confused. Was it possible that this first Miss Qin was meeting someone privately? Otherwise, why was she so protective? But it did not seem. Why did she knock her out? Could it be possible that she pretended to faint? In the backyard of a big family, there were many cases of pretending to faint and acting coquettishly. There were many madams who pretended to be sick, stupid, crazy, or fainted. Several of them picked up their handkerchiefs and wiped their lips. It seemed that this Miss Qin's character was not good. Although they were a little confused about why it happened so coincidentally, thinking that it might have something to do with the people in Duke Xing's mansion, they became more and more excited. They thought that heir of Miss Duke King. It is. Heir of Duke. Many people denied it after thinking for a while. They felt that the heir of Duke Xing was a very good person. They had never heard that he liked women, so it should be impossible. Could it be another male master in the mansion? Qin Wanru glanced at the crowd indifferently and saw everyone's conjecture. She sneered in her heart. It should have been prepared for me. He deceived me to come here and then left. Yujia went to get clothes. I was left alone here. She should have seen something unspeakable. Then she was knocked out and thrown at the back door. Duke Xing's mansion is holding a banquet today, so it is impossible to kill me. When I wake up, I will look like Chin Yuru or even worse. I can't even find the servant girl who threw the fruit plate on me or the old maid who led the way. At that time, they will definitely say that I want to have an affair with someone. At least Chin Yuru has an old maid as a witness. Seeing that Chin Yuru's words had aroused the suspicion of many madams and misses, Madame of Duke Xing was a little angry. She shook off Chin Yuru's hand and said with a cold look, "Miss Chin, it must have nothing to do with our mansion. I will ask someone to check it out later, so that Miss Chin will not suffer inexplicable grievances." Seeing that Chin Yuru's words had aroused the suspicion of many madams and misses, Madame of Duke Xing was a little angry. She shook off Chin Yuru's hand and said with a cold look, "Miss Chin, it must have nothing to do with our mansion. I will ask someone to check it out later, so that Miss Chin will not suffer inexplicable grievances." How could she not see through everyone's thoughts? If Chin Yuru had not said that, others would not have suspected Duke Xing's mansion. Now with her words, it really made people think that it had something to do with the male master of Duke Xing's mansion. Madame of Duke Xing hated it the most when her family members knew their own affairs. "Thank you, madam," Qin Wanru said in front of Qin Yuru. "It doesn't matter. This is what our mansion should do." Second miss is Hao Er's benefactor. First miss's affairs are also our mansion's affairs. Madame of Duke Xing calmed down and her face became calm again. Although there was still a little displeasure on Qin Yuru's face, it was basically invisible. Qin Wanru and Qin Yuru changed their clothes again. When they returned to the table, Shui Rulin anxiously took her hand and asked in a low voice, "What happened?" "It's okay." Qin Wanru patted Shui Rulin's hand to comfort her. Before she left, she had hinted that no matter what happened, Shui Rulin should not come over. She was afraid that if Countess Yong was in a mess and plotted evil again, Shui Rulin's belly would be in danger. Seeing her look, Shui Rulin also knew that something had happened before, but it should not be a big problem. Qin Yuru, who had changed her clothes, tightly pursed her lips and looked livid, but she did not say anything. It happened so suddenly that she still had not figured out who plotted against her. She looked at all the people present and then turned her eyes to Countess Yong. She felt that only Countess Yong was the most trustworthy. She stood up and walked to Countess Yong's table regardless of everyone's surprised eyes. "Aunt." Seeing Countess Yong, Qin Yuru's eyes turned red and she called her in a low voice. Seeing Qin Yuru coming over, Countess Yong hurriedly stood up, smiled apologetically to several madams around her, and then took Qin Yuru to one side to talk. When everyone followed them just now, Countess Yong did not follow them. "You, what's wrong? What happened just now?" Aunt originally wanted to come over and have a look, but was stopped by other madams, Countess Yong said with concern. She had always seen how much old Madame of Duke Yong valued this granddaughter. Qin Yuru called in a low voice as if she had seen her own family member, and then threw herself into Countess Yong's arms and cried sadly. "Don't cry, don't cry. What's going on? Did the two over there plot against you again?" Countess Yong gently patted Qin Yuru's back and comforted her while saying. Her words reminded Qin Yuru. She cried and said in a low voice, "Aunt, are they really the two of them? The servant girl and the old maid are from Duke Xing's mansion." Of course, she knew that Countess Yong was talking about Qin Wanru and Shui Rulin. There are so many servants in Duke Xing's mansion. It is very easy to bribe two of them. "You are so silly," Countess Yong said. "It must be them. I don't know anyone here. Why would someone plot against me like this? It turns out to be them," Qin Yuru said viciously. She had been a little suspicious of them, but couldn't figure it out at the moment. Hearing Countess Yong's words, she immediately believed them. Qin Wanru and Shui Rulin were good. She would not forget the shame today. Well, don't cry. If a beautiful girl cries, she will not be beautiful. Then or will think that I bullied you." Seeing that her words worked, Countess Yong persuaded her in a low voice. Qin Wanru calmly withdrew her eyes from Countess Yong and Qin Yuru, and a trace of coldness flashed in her eyes. Needless to say, Countess Yong pushed the blame on her and her mother. She was not afraid that Qin Yuru and Madame D would plot against her. Originally, Qin Yuru and Madame D wanted her and her mother to die. They framed her again and again in Jiangzhou, which almost made them die. It did not matter if Qin Yuru and Madame D hated her for one more thing. But she did not want to be a sharp weapon in others' hands. She could see clearly that it was Countess Yong's plot. But how could Countess Yong know so clearly about the things in Duke Xing's mansion? Qin Yuru obviously saw something that could not be said, and then she was knocked out. The yard was originally a suspicious point. It was close to the door of the backyard, which was convenient to get in and out. It was not the inner yard or the outer yard, but it naturally hid secrets and was a convenient place to get in and out. Since there was a secret, it seemed that it could not be easily found. If it was not for Madame of Duke Xing's means, it would not have been possible. In order to deal with her, she did not hesitate to expose a great secret. It seemed that she thought too highly of her and used a sledgehammer to kill a chicken. Could it be that there was a follow-up to this matter? Narrowing her watery eyes slightly, she quietly thought about what other possibilities in this situation. Who is it? The man sat by the window and asked coldly. It's the eldest daughter of Ningyuan Army General's mansion who came to the capital city to report. A chubby man reported respectfully. Ningyuan Army General Qin Huaiyong? The man said the name word by word. Yes, it's him. The fat man nodded repeatedly. It's a good candidate. The man smiled coldly, and his eyes fell on a file in front of him strangely. He looked through it for a few times and said, "Have you dealt with the matter?" "Don't worry, it's all been dealt with." The fat man hurriedly lowered his head and said, "On this file were not only some outstanding officials in the Imperial court, but also some misses from aristocratic families, as well as their comments and portraits." "And your daughters?" "For me, you've really done your best." The man raised a portrait and chuckled. Chapter 192. Is there any activity after the banquet? The man asked with deep eyes. No activity. It is originally a plum appreciation party, so most of the women will leave. The fat man thought for a while and said, "Don't let it affect me." The cold voice was a little murderous. Although it was low, it made people secretly scared. "Don't worry," the fat man said hurriedly, and his forehead began to sweat. If this man really wanted to do something today, it would be troublesome. "You're on your own." The man snorted coldly, stood up and strode out. The banquet of Duke Xing's mansion was quite successful, except for a small interlude. After all, Qin Yuru was not a famous miss from an aristocratic family in the capital city. Although everyone thought what she had done was very disgraceful and this miss might not have a good character, this matter did not have a big impact on the overall banquet of Duke Xing's mansion. But this matter did not make a big impact on the whole banquet of Duke Xing's mansion. After all, nothing really happened, and no one saw the man. Everything was just a guess. As for the reputation of the first Miss Qin, everyone had a tacit understanding that at least their mansion would not marry such a girl. However, seeing Qin Yuru walking beside Countess Yong, some nosy madams were inquiring about the relationship between the two families. So there was another saying that Duke Yong's mansion would marry Qin's mansion. And it was this first Miss Qin. For a moment, many madams looked at Countess Yong with a little pity in their eyes, only looking at Countess Yong's face. It was hard to hide anger. However, no one said anything in front of her face, so Countess Yong could not find a chance to explain even if she wanted to. Good news did not go out, but bad news spread for thousands of miles. As soon as this matter came out of the gate of Duke Xing's mansion, it immediately made many people curious about Qin's mansion. Then some well-informed people dug out the previous rumor, saying that Madame D, who married from Duke Yong's mansion, was not in charge of the domestic affairs of the family now. The reason was that Madame D was said to be a bad person and liked to stir up trouble viciously. She wanted Madame Shui, the co-wife of Qin's mansion, to have a miscarriage. Such a vicious behavior, of course, could not be in charge of the domestic affairs. Originally, what Madame D had done was only spread in the marketplace and had not been spread to the aristocratic families. However, now that it was mixed with Qin Yuru's matter, it became more and more unpleasant to hear. All kinds of rumors were flying all over the place, together with the rumors of the aristocratic families. When Madame D heard the news from Duke Yong's mansion, She almost fainted with anger. Although these were all rumors without any evidence, many people had witnessed Qin Yuru's incident. Therefore, they talked about it in a vivid manner. There were even some erotic jokes, which were spread very badly for a while. Although the inner court of Qin's mansion wasn't doing well, Qin Huaiyong's appointment had been smoothly confirmed. The vice domain chief of the Imperial Guards camp, a lower third-rank official position. He would also be given the title of Ningyuan Army General. However, this Ningyuan Army General was not the previous Ningyuan Army General. This was a position that Qin Huaiyong could never have imagined. He was only a fifth-rank official before. As soon as the news came, everyone in the mansion was happy. The mark of Qin's mansion in front of the mansion gate was removed and replaced with the mark of Ningyuan Army General's mansion. In the capital city, where there were all high-ranking officials and aristocratic families, the vice domain chief was not a high official, but a close minister of the emperor. The Imperial Guards camp and several other camps were in charge of the security of the capital city. If he was not valued by the emperor, he would never be placed in the Imperial Guards camp. As soon as the news came out, people who had some relationship with Qin's mansion became enthusiastic and came to congratulate them. Madame Dowager also looked refreshed. Her illness was almost gone, and she seemed to be almost the same as when she was not sick in the past. She asked someone to find Qin Huaiyong. She thought it was troublesome to thank so many people one by one. She wanted to hold a wedding banquet as a courtesy. Qin Huaiyong didn't doubt it and asked Madame Dowager and Shui Rulin to handle it. Shui Rulin was a little pregnant now. Fortunately, it was only a little and not obvious. With Madame Dowager's guidance, she could manage things. This was the first time that she hosted a banquet in the capital city. Naturally, she couldn't be careless. She wanted to do a good job wholeheartedly. Qin Wanru saw that she was really tired sometimes, so she helped her. With Madame Dowager's guidance and Qin Wanru's help, Shui Rulin steadily took over the internal affairs of Ningyuan Army General's mansion. There were also 2 concubines who were in charge. The whole Ningyuan Army General's mansion was gradually in order. After being busy for about half a month, Yujia suddenly caught a servant girl and came in one day. "Miss, this servant girl sneaked out and was caught by me," Yujia said as soon as she entered the door. Qin Wanru put down the account book in her hand and looked at the servant girl below. Looking at the servant girl's age and timid appearance, she knew that she was just the most ordinary servant girl. She blinked and looked at Yujia in confusion. In fact, this kind of thing didn't need to be reported to her. "What do you mean?" Qin Wanru asked, rubbing her eyebrows which were a little painful. "This servant girl is from our yard. She has always followed Qin Shui. This time she sneaked out," Yujia said angrily. Qin Wanru's eyes swept over the little servant girl, and her eyes became slightly cold. "Tell me, what's the matter?" Hearing Yujia's words, she really looked a little familiar. She turned out to be someone from her yard. There were many servant girls and old maids in the yard, so Qin Wanru didn't pay much attention to them. "Second miss, I really have something to do. Sister Xiao is sick and wants to see Nanny Dong, so she asked me to see her." The servant girl knelt down and said in a panic, "Dong Xiao is sick?" Qin Wanru narrowed her watery eyes and looked at Yujia. Recently, she had been busy with many things, so she didn't pay much attention to Dong Xiao. Nanny Dong was also busy with the business of the shop outside, and occasionally came in with a message. Thinking of this, it was true that she hadn't seen Nanny Dong for a long time. She is sick, but not very serious. Nanny Yu has called a doctor for her before, and he said that she would be fine after taking a few doses of medicine. Yujia replied. "She needs to see Nanny Dong for such a small thing?" Qin Wanru's eyes darkened a little. Dong Xiao was not a child, so she didn't know the seriousness of the matter at this time. Yes, it's Nanny Xiao's idea. She hasn't seen Nanny Dong for a long time, and she is sick, so she especially wants to see Nanny Dong, the little servant girl said hurriedly. Qin Wanru's face darkened. Since Dong Xiao wants to see Nanny Dong, she should come and tell me. Why did she ask you to sneak out? Yujia, see what she has on her? The little servant girl was so scared that her face changed dramatically, and she subconsciously reached out to cover her cuffs. Yujia came over, pulled her hand away, and pulled out a hairpin and a handkerchief that she tightly covered in her sleeve. It was a very beautiful hairpin, which was the one Qin Wanru saw on Dong Xiu's head that day. Dong Xiu couldn't afford to wear such a hairpin at this time, and it shouldn't be with Dong Xiu now. How dare she steal things? Miss, look at this hairpin. Yujia handed the hairpin to Qin Wanru and said sternly, if she dares to steal things from the mansion, she will be beaten and driven out of the mansion. Second miss, I didn't steal it. Sister Xiu asked me to give it to Nanny Dong. I didn't steal it. When the little servant girl heard that she would be beaten and driven out of the mansion, she was so scared that her face turned pale. She shook her hands and was so anxious that she burst into tears. Does this hairpin belong to Dong Xiu? Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the hairpin and she asked lightly. Yes, it belongs to Sister Xiu. Sister Xiu asked me to put it in Nanny Dong's place because she was worried about it. The little servant girl said repeatedly, Sister Xiu said that it's not good to say this kind of thing, and she was afraid that second miss would regard her as an outsider, so she asked me to sneak out and give it to Nanny Dong. Did Xiu say where Nanny Dong is? Qin Wanru asked slowly, hiding a trace of coldness in her eyes. Was it just a matter of a hairpin? Originally, this hairpin came inexplicably, and it was most likely to be handled by Qin Shui. Now she felt that it was not so simple. It was not safe to keep it with her, so she wanted to send it to Nanny Dong's place. How many things did Dong Xiu lose to make her feel so unsafe? Since they moved in, Nanny Yu had kept the yard in good order. She had never heard of anyone losing things. Why was Dong Xiu so worried that she had to send the hairpin to Nanny Dong, who was outside the mansion? Sister Xiu has told me that Madame Dong is cleaning up the shop. I know where to find Madame Dong. The little servant girl said hurriedly, for fear that Qin Wanru would not believe her if she spoke slowly. Why is there a word on it? Qin Wanru raised her eyes and looked at the little servant girl. The word was very obscure, very small, and it was in the shape of a flower. If one was not careful, one would only think it was in the shape of a flower. I don't know how to read, the little servant girl said with a blank face. Did Dong Xiu give it to you? Qin Wanru's face darkened. A little servant girl who knew nothing? Sister Xiu gave it to me. The little servant girl nodded repeatedly. Is there anyone to testify? Qin Wanru narrowed her eyes. No, there was only me and Sister Xiu in the room at that time. The little servant girl was flustered. She was anxious and scared, wiping her tears. Qin Wanru leaned back and said in a low voice, if there is no one to testify, then it can't be explained clearly. You can go and receive your punishment. Yujia responded and came over to pull the servant girl. When the servant girl saw that Yujia was really going to pull her out, she also panicked. Second miss, Sister Xiu, then testify. What if she doesn't admit it? Qin Wanru smiled slightly, with a bit of coldness in her smile. Whoever gets involved in this kind of thing is unlucky. Do you think Xiu will admit it now? The hairpin on it is printed with the word Qin, and I didn't give Xiu any hairpin. Where did she get it? Her words stunned the little servant girl, and her face turned pale without a trace of blood. If she really thought about it, it meant that the hairpin was not obtained in a proper way. Since it was not obtained in a proper way, Dong Xiu would certainly not admit it now that the matter was blown up. She was the scapegoat. Chapter 193. Who? Sister Qin Shui. It's Sister Qin Shui. She happened to pass by the window outside and I saw it. The servant girl was so anxious that her forehead was covered with sweat. Qin Shui? Yes, it's Sister Qin Shui. When Sister Xiu was talking to me, Sister Qin Shui happened to pass by. I saw that she walked very slowly and glanced into the window. She should have seen me take the hairpin from Sister Xiu's hand. The servant girl seemed to be holding on to the last life-saving straw and said in a panic. Besides, is there anything else? Qin Wanru lowered her head and slightly hesitated. There is nothing else. The servant girl thought for a moment and shook her head. Then you go to deliver the hairpin. Qin Wanru suddenly smiled, and the corners of her red lips were slightly raised. Miss Yujie was also stunned and loosened her grip. You go to deliver the hairpin yourself, but I don't want Xiao and Qin Shui to know about this. If they know, it's the three of you who colluded. Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the servant girl and said slowly, Yes, miss, I understand. Thank you, miss. The servant girl thanked Qin Wanru gratefully for giving her such a chance to prove herself. Go. Seeing that the servant girl was actually smart, Qin Wanru smiled slightly and handed over the hairpin in her hand, with a trace of serenity flashing in her eyes. It seemed that someone couldn't stay idle again. Yes, I'll go now. The servant girl wiped away her tears, carefully took the hairpin, and nodded hard. Second Miss gave her a chance to prove herself, and she would definitely not let Xiao and Qin Shui know. Otherwise, Second Miss would definitely think that she had colluded with them to steal things from the mansion. When the matter was exposed, she would not be able to escape. Although the servant girl was a low-ranking servant girl in the mansion, she was usually smart. Originally, she thought that it would be good to be close to Qin Shui, who looked very kind and was also the principal servant girl in the yard. Now she did not get any benefits and was almost caught as a thief. How could she not be afraid? After wiping her face, she came out of the main room with red eyes and hurried out. When she just got out of the yard, she was stopped by Qin Shui, who was hiding behind a tree. Qin Shui pulled her to the back of the tree, looked at the tears on her face and asked, what happened? I accidentally bumped into Sister Yujie just now, and she scolded me. Lowered her head and wiped the tears on the corner of her eyes. She did not dare to tell the truth. Why did you go to the main room of Second Miss? Shui looked at the door of the yard and asked in confusion when no one noticed them. Sister Yujie was still holding something for Miss in her hand. I broke it. She took me to explain it to Miss. The little maid said with grievance. Qin Wanru? Nothing. Nodded. That's good. Sister Xiao? Just asked you what you've done for her. Have you done it? Qin Shui heaved a sigh of relief. She revealed a smile on her face, as if she had no idea what had happened. Then I have to go quickly. I don't want to delay Sister Xiao's business. Exclaimed and hurriedly ran away. Originally, she thought that Qin Shui might not know much about it. But now that Qin Shui said so, she immediately understood that Qin Shui knew something. Sure enough, Qin Shui was plotting against her. Thought angrily. She tightened her feet and went to the back door. When she arrived at the back door, she was stopped by the old maid at the back door. After asking where she came from, obediently said that she was from Jifang Pavilion and went outside to sell some snacks for Sister Qin Shui in the yard. Then the old maid let her go. It was not unusual for the principal maids in the mansion to occasionally send some junior maids to run errands. Moreover, she was the principal maid of the 2nd Mississippi went to the place designated by Dong Xiao. She was originally from the capital, so it did not take long for her to find the place. She looked at the shop that was being renovated and was about to go in, but she was stopped by an ordinary servant. Are you the servant girl of the Qin's mansion? Are you here to send something to Nanny Dong? The servant stopped her and asked directly. Yes, who are you? Io was stunned for a moment. She did not expect that Xiao had already told Nanny Dong. Nanny Dong is busy now. If you have something, just give it to me. I will send it to Nanny Dong later. The servant pointed to the top of the shop. The decoration of the shop had not been completed, and there was still the sound of carpenters knocking. It sounded very busy. Still hesitated. But don't you believe me? If Nanny Dong didn't tell me, how could I know that you are from the Qin's mansion and that you are the servant girl of the 2nd Miss? Nanny Dong's daughter, Dong Xiao, asked you to bring this thing to Nanny Dong. The servant reached out his hand impatiently and said, Hurry up. I have to go up and help Nanny Dong carry things later. Seeing that the servant kept urging her and his words were all corresponding, hesitated for a moment and took out the hairpin wrapped in a handkerchief from her bosom. As soon as the servant saw it, he reached out and grabbed the hairpin. Then he turned around and ran to the shop. Go back quickly. Don't let anyone find out that you have been out for a long time. Seeing that he was running to the shop, Chu was relieved. It seemed that he was really Nanny Dong's servant. Thinking that she had sent this hot potato away, she could not help but feel relieved. Then she turned around and left. When the servant entered the shop was in a mess. There were helpers, and Nanny Dong was directing people to arrange some things in suitable places. When she saw a strange servant come in, she saw that he just looked around and did not run in, as if he was watching others decorate. She frowned and ignored him. The servant stood in the shop for a while. It seemed that he was bored. He looked around at the door and then turned to leave. Nanny Dong was busy at this time and did not notice when he left. In a tea house diagonally opposite to this shop, Qin Wanru saw the manservant come out of the shop. He stood at the door and looked around. When he didn't find the servant girl, he swaggered and patted the dust that he had stained in the room just now and walked towards this side. "Miss, it seems that he is really coming to this tea house." Yu Jie had been staring at the young servant closely. She watched him walk over and enter the shop downstairs, then said, "It should be here." Qin Wanru said thoughtfully. She came here by carriage and arrived a little earlier than the servant girl Chu. Looking around, she found that there was only this tea house diagonally opposite where she could drink tea, wait for someone, or guard someone. That was why she chose this tea house. Since the hairpin was sent outside the mansion, there must be someone outside the mansion. The time when Chu left the mansion was not certain, so someone must guard her. Qin Wanru had been with Nanny Dong for a long time, so she could conclude that Nanny Dong was not that kind of person. The hairpin would definitely not fall into her hands in the end, so she had to wait here early. "Go to the door and have a look," Qin Wanru said. Yu Jie nodded, put down the curtain in her hand, walked to the door, gently pushed it open a little, and looked at the stairway. When she went upstairs, Qin Wanru specially asked for a private room facing the stairway. He heard footsteps coming up the stairs. The manservant was out of breath. It was indeed the manservant he saw upstairs just now. Coincidentally, the private room that the servant entered was the one on the right side of their private room. Seeing the servant go in, Yu Jie came over, pointed to the room on the right, and said to Qin Wanru softly, "Miss, this is the room." Qin Wanru looked at the wall. It was really a wooden wall, unlike some private rooms that were separated by screens. It was impossible to hear clearly. She could only vaguely hear the servant's voice, which seemed to be saying something. She stood up, walked to the wall on the right, and put her ear on the wooden wall. Then she faintly heard some sounds. Yu Jie also came over and listened to the sound like Qin Wanru. After the servant's voice finished, there was a woman's voice. Hearing a woman's voice, Qin Wanru was slightly stunned, but she was not too surprised. She just listened carefully, but only vaguely heard some sounds, which were not very real. Then the two voices seemed to say something. It seemed that one was asking and the other was answering. They even said a few words from time to time. Then the sound in the room stopped. After a while, there was the sound of a chair being pulled next door. It seemed that they were going to leave. Qin Wanru rolled her watery eyes, walked to the door lightly, and looked out through the half-closed door. At this moment, the door over there opened, and a man who looked like a servant came out first and stood respectfully on one side. Then she saw a woman coming out with a servant girl. She was not tall but very thin. Looking at her, the servant girl beside her was a little taller and looked stronger. Because her body was slightly sideways, her face could not be seen. She rolled her watery eyes and silently pointed to an empty teacup on the table to Yu Jie. Yu Jie understood and hurried to take one. Qin Wanru took it, opened the door slightly, and smashed the teacup in her hand heavily, which happened to hit the stairs. The miss who was about to go downstairs came out of the private room and was about to go downstairs. She was so scared that she almost fell down when she was smashed by such a cup. The servant girl hurriedly reached out to pull her. They struggled to stand firm. The miss turned to Qin Wanru's private room with a pale face. The servant girl was about to go forward with a face full of anger, but was stopped by the Mississippi. "Miss, I dare not make trouble anymore. Please let me go." Suddenly there came a woman's voice begging for mercy in the private room, and then there was the sound of something hitting something. It turned out that the master was scolding the servant. The miss frowned, carefully avoided the debris under her feet, and walked downstairs with the servant girl. The servant was a distance behind, but he was also closely behind. In the private room, Yujia stamped her feet hard while watching, and tried hard to make a sound that seemed to be a servant girl begging for mercy. Chapter 194. Ning Xueqing? Was this the Ning Xueqing who secretly got pregnant with the playboy whom she was engaged to for the first time in her last life? Qin Wanru had not figured out the reason for the first engagement until now. There was a part of her memory that she had forgotten, but it seemed to be related to an accident. In order to cover up her embarrassment, she had to get engaged in a hurry. From what happened later, Qin Wanru came to a conclusion that Ning Xueqing seemed to be the cousin of the playboy Wang Xingxue. They should have had a relationship for a long time. The reason why they delayed getting married was that Wang Xingxue was originally a playboy. He not only hooked up with this cousin, but also had other women, and had not decided to marry this cousin. Madame D and Madame of Duke Xing should have plotted against her and made her get engaged to Wang Xingxue. Wang Xingxue was the nephew of Duke Xing's mansion. Since Madame of Duke Xing was the matchmaker, he naturally felt proud and agreed with her. He had already thrown Ning Xueqing out of Java. Unexpectedly, this cousin sister of hers was resourceful. Not only did she restrain herself, but after she got pregnant, she would make a scene at old Madame of Duke Xing's birthday banquet, expose this matter, and then ask old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion to make a decision. In front of so many people, even if old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion was displeased, she had to let them get married. In fact, this was also a good thing at that time. However, such a person had nothing to do with her for the time being. There was no Wang Xingxue around her. Why did she come to deal with her? Not to mention Wang Xingxue, it was also the first time that she had seen Madame of Duke Xing. As for Madame D and Madame of Duke Xing, she had never seen each other, so it was impossible for them to have hooked up with each other to plot against her. Then where did this Ning Xueqing come from? How could these two people, who had not had much contact with each other in the last life, suddenly have a connection with each other? If Ning Xueqing hadn't made a scene in the last life and she had been taken there, she would not have known her. With suspicious eyes falling on Ning Xueqing's slender figure, she suddenly stopped halfway up the stairs. "Miss, are you all right? Do you want to take a rest? Were you frightened just now?" Seeing her stop, her servant girl beside her hurriedly came over to help her and said anxiously, "Was it because the cup he smashed just now had scared him?" Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows slightly, and her eyes fell on her back. From the back, she looked really delicate. In the last life, although Wang Xingxue was not the young master of Duke Xing's mansion, he was Duke Xing's nephew and seemed to be the son of a grand madam of Duke Xing's mansion, which made Duke Xing's mansion lose face. Old Madam was so furious that she overturned the table on the spot and smashed so many things in front of her, but Ning Xueqing was not afraid at all. What was going on? "I'm fine." The soft voice was a little weak, and it was obvious that the speaker was very weak. What kind of people are they? Why don't they go back to their own mansion if they want to teach people a lesson? They are not well educated. "Miss, why don't you take a rest before you leave? What if you really feel uncomfortable?" The servant girl glared at the door of Qin Wanru's private room and said angrily, "All right, let's take a break." The woman held the servant girl's hand and turned her hand. Qin Wanru's eyes fell on her face, which was much paler than before, and her eyes immediately widened. This was definitely not Ning Xueqing. Just now, at first glance, she looked very similar, but in reality she didn't. Her brows were even more gentle, which could make a man's heart soften. Although she wasn't particularly beautiful, that kind of delicate feeling that could almost be blown away by the wind had a special kind of charm, and this kind of charm could attract men the most. However, such a woman had plotted against her. Qin Wanru frowned and watched her approach slowly and enter the previous private room. There was the sound of a chair being dragged in the private room, and then a servant ran out in a hurry. After a while, he came back with a doctor and seemed to say something inside. After the doctor left, they stopped for a while. The woman and the servant girl reappeared at the door, and the servant boy still followed them. The three of them did not stop this time, but went straight down the stairs and left the tea house. During the whole process, Qin Wanru had been quietly standing behind the door and watching. She had an intuition that this woman had something to do with Ning Xueqing, but she was not Ning Xueqing. Originally, this matter had nothing to do with her, and in this life, she would never have anything to do with that libertine again. However, there was a voice in her heart repeatedly reminding her that this woman was plotting against her now, and it must have something to do with Ning Xueqing. A cold, turbid air was suppressed in her heart, which made her feel very uncomfortable. It seemed that something had broken free from her heart, and her hands and feet were cold. Miss, Yu Jie hurriedly said, noticing that her situation was strange. The woman had left, but Miss was still staring at the entrance of the corridor, which made her panic. Qin Wanru did not answer, and her face, which had been white and pink, became as pale as ice. She did not know when she clenched her fists, and her red lips were tightly pursed, showing a sense of ice and snow. Seeing Qin Wanru like this, Yu Jie was very flustered. She hurriedly reached out to grab Qin Wanru's clothes, shook her gently a few times, and called, "Miss." Although the voice of Miss was not loud, it was like the evening drum and morning bell, awakening Qin Wanru from the memory of the past. She took a deep breath, moved her stiff feet, and walked to the chair to sit down. The warm sunlight outside the window shone in through the window and also slowly shone into her heart, giving her a trace of warmth. Now that she had been reborn, she was no longer the pitiful woman who was plotted against in her previous life, becoming the first woman in the kingdom of Eastern Song to be tortured and cut in half at the waist. She picked up the tea on the table and took a sip to calm down the huge waves and emotions surging in her heart. When she looked up again, she had regained her previous calm look, moved her legs, and said, "Yuru, let's go." "Go back to the mansion? Don't you want to investigate that woman?" Yu Jie thought that Qin Wanru was going back to the mansion, so she asked in confusion. "Investigate? How can we not investigate?" Qin Wanru stood up numbly, and her legs had recovered because she had moved just now. "But they have all left? Find the clinic." Qin Wanru stood up and said, "When the servant invited First Madam, he came back soon, saying that the clinic was nearby. Moreover, when the servant went downstairs, he did not ask anyone where the clinic was. Obviously, he was familiar with the location of the clinic. When Yu Jie went to pay the bill, she asked the accountant at the counter where the clinic was. Then Qin Wanru took Yu Jie to the clinic on the right side of the tea house. The clinic was in a small alley on the right side, and it was easy to find. When they entered the door, they saw a servant coming over and asked with a smile, "Miss, do you need to see a doctor this time? Do you want to see a doctor at home or here?" This was a small but looked quite good clinic. The room was full of silk banners, which should be sent here after the patient was cured. The doctor on duty was not outside, but inside. "Look, it was our cousin who was seeing a doctor in the tea house just now. She just forgot one thing and happened to see my miss, so she specially asked my miss to ask about it." Yu Jie came forward and said, "Then please wait a moment." The servant also knew about the visit and said with a smile. As he said, he went into the inner room. After a while, an old doctor came out, who was the one Qin Wanru just saw at the door. After the old doctor came out, he sat down on the chair, looked at Qin Wanru, and said impatiently, "First, Miss Ning, what else do you want? Didn't I make it very clear that she just needs to calm down a little? She doesn't need to use medicine. It's not a big deal, but it always turns out to be like this, as if something big is going to happen. Is it really okay?" When hearing the title of First Miss Ning, Qin Wanru's heart thumped, but her face did not change. She asked in a good voice with a look of concern. "Yes, it is okay." The old doctor rubbed his forehead and really thought that Qin Wanru was a family member of the patient. "She is so delicate. She was originally healthy, but you people make a fuss. Now even she feels that she is weak. In fact, it is really okay, and she doesn't need to use medicine. But her body is always so weak," Qin Wanru said helplessly. "That is also because your family spoils her. If you ignore her, nothing will happen. Every time she seems to make a big deal. I have something to do here, so I won't delay this matter." The old doctor became more and more impatient. He stood up and turned to walk inside, leaving Qin Wanru directly. Hey, why did you? Yu Jie was anxious. Miss, I am really sorry. Our doctor has a patient now. He was anxious and angry, so his words were a little impulsive. Please forgive him. The servant hurriedly came forward to apologize, and then changed the topic. But first, Miss Ning is really... Our doctor didn't mean to say such words. Every time she makes a fuss because of some small things, our doctor is also annoyed. More than once? Qin Wanru continued to ask calmly. Of course, more than once. She also made a fuss a few days ago. That time it seemed to be the heir of Duke Yong. Yes, the heir of Duke Yong. I have seen him before. He sent her here, and she also made a fuss. It seemed that she suddenly became ill, but in fact it was really okay. If it were not for the fact that first Miss Ning looked really pale at that time, our doctor didn't want to pay attention to her. The servant said helplessly. First Miss Ning was indeed a person who made a fuss, but in fact it was not a big deal. At most, she was a little shocked, or someone said something to make her angry or uncomfortable. Her body was originally very good, but now it seemed that she would be blown down by the wind. Speaking of this, it made people speechless. Of course, as a servant, he did not dare to say these words. Even the doctor could only tell her to relax and have a good rest, but it was up to her how much she could recover. Although the servant's words were vague, Qin Wanru and Yu Jie both understood. They looked at each other and saw the answer. First, Miss Ning had a heart disease, but she was not really sick. It was just like a healthy person who always hinted that he was sick and always felt that he could not bear the surprise, as if he was really sick. So, this Miss Ning's illness was completely caused by her own actions? After a pause, Qin Wanru thought of a key question, smiled slightly and asked, Is the heir of Duke Yong on good terms with her? Chapter 195. Aren't they cousins? The servant froze for a moment, as if he didn't understand why Qin Wanru didn't know. Our miss is first Miss Ning's cousin, but she has nothing to do with Duke Yong's mansion. Yu Jie explained cleverly. Oh, I see. The servant understood. One was her mother's cousin, and the other was her father's cousin, so it was possible that they didn't know each other. A few days ago is half a month ago? Qin Wanru asked again. Yes, it was at that time. Alas, it was really noisy again, as if it was about to die. The servant shook his head with an experienced look. Can I go directly to Ning's mansion from here? I just arrived in the capital city, so I don't know the way. Qin Wanru smiled modestly and changed the topic. Yes, you can. If you go from here, you don't have to go through the opposite street. Turn at the back, turn at the end, and then turn right to the second house. The manservant said enthusiastically. He even told him some trivial things. Then he walked to the door and pointed outside. He even specifically told the manservant the house number. Qin Wanru remembered them all, thanked him with a smile, and left with Yu Jie. When she walked to the door, she looked at the direction pointed by the servant, turned around, and walked out the previous way. The carriage stopped not far from the tea house. Qin Wanru didn't go back to the carriage directly at this time, but went to her own shop to see Nanny Dong first. Nanny Dong was asking people to carefully move things inside. Seeing Qin Wanru coming, she hurriedly wiped her sweat and greeted her with a smile. Second miss. How is it? Qin Wanru looked at everything inside. Although it was still very messy, she could vaguely see that it was much brighter than before, and the layout was better. Thank you, Nanny Dong. Qin Wanru said with a smile. You're welcome, Mississippi. This is what I should do. Madame Dong was full of smiles, and she looked much more energetic than when they first met. How long will it be open? About a month if it is fast, and a little later if it is slow, Nanny Dong estimated after thinking for a while. She knew that it was definitely possible before the Spring Festival. The Spring Festival was a good time, and the shop was more prosperous at this time. Qin Wanru was very satisfied with this. She nodded and said, Madame Dong, if you need anything, just tell me. Hearing Qin Wanru's words, Madame Dong hesitated and looked like she wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Are you worried about Xiao? Qin Wanru smiled and asked tentatively. I'm worried about Xiao. It's been so many days and I haven't had time to see her. I'm afraid that she'll cause trouble for second miss. Madame Dong smiled helplessly and said, she grew up by my side since she was a child. Although she's not young, she's still a naive girl. I saw that she had a good relationship with Qing Shui in your yard before, but I thought that servant girl was a careless girl and couldn't be with her. But Xiao didn't listen to me. I was afraid that she... Did you persuade her before? Qin Wanru asked with watery eyes. I did advise her not to play with such scheming people. With her personality, she won't be able to win against them, but she just wouldn't listen. Speaking of Dong Xiao, Madame Dong looked helpless. She paused and her eyes were slightly red. I protected her so well before that her personality... Madame Dong, don't worry. I'll separate her from Qing Shui for a period of time. Qin Wanru thought for a while, but she had made a decision and comforted Madame Dong softly. She was still confused about this matter. She didn't know why Qing Shui would get in touch with the first Miss Ning, but needless to say, Madame D and her daughter must have played a part in it. She didn't expect that Nanny Zhou's accident that day would make Madame D come up with such a plan. She had thought that Madame D and Qin Yuru hadn't made any trouble after such a long time. Although Di Yen came less often, he was quiet and nothing happened when he came, which made people suspect for no reason. Now it seemed that it should be here. Now that she had found it, she had figured out Madame D's thoughts. She would find out the matter about Dong Xiao by herself. Thank you very much, second miss. Madame Dong breathed a sigh of relief. She really didn't like the servant girl named Qing Shui. At first glance, she could tell that she had a plot to make friends with Xiao. She had seen all kinds of people, so how could she not know that Qing Shui had other intentions? However, her daughter knew nothing about it. She had tried her best to persuade Xiao, but Xiao was angry with her. Madame Dong had suffered a lot when she was young, so she was most afraid of this kind of servant girl with ulterior motives. However, she found that the second miss of the Qin family was even more extraordinary. Now the person she admired the most was Qin Wanru. With her words, she felt a lot more at ease. She felt relieved and her face brightened up. Second miss, I really have something to tell you. I've been so busy recently that I didn't even go to the mansion. Anyway, it's not urgent. Nanny Dong said and went inside. After a while, she came back with a few books. Second miss, these are the books sent by Childwen that day. He said that you want to read them. As Madame Dong spoke, she presented the books in her hand. Qin Wanru took them and flipped through them. She couldn't help but smile. When Shichi was really a gentleman, he kept his word. What she wanted was to get close to him to repay the kindness he had shown her that day. It was necessary to keep in touch with him, but she was only a young girl. If she wanted to keep in touch with him for a long time and constantly remind him about his second brother and his cousin, it would be very inconvenient for her to do so. She tapped the books in her palm and frowned slightly. Second miss, Childwen also said that if you can't understand it, you can ask someone to ask him. Madame Dong said hesitantly. In fact, she also felt that it was not appropriate. Although her miss was young and didn't look like she would be in trouble, she was after all more than 7 years old. Qin Wanru's eyes lit up. Did he say that? Did he tell me where to find him? A person like Wen Shichi would never let her go to Deputy Prime Minister's mansion to find him. However, since he said this, he would definitely give her a shortcut. Madame Dong really felt that it was not appropriate. However, when she saw Qin Wanru's clear eyes, she felt that it was not appropriate to keep silent. After hesitating for a moment, she gritted her teeth and said, Second miss, I don't think it's appropriate. Second miss, you shouldn't see a stranger. What's more, you don't know him. Madame Dong was afraid that Qin Wanru would be cheated by this Childwen. Although this young master looked handsome and outstanding, and his manners were refined, it was obvious that he was the son of one of the few aristocratic families in the capital. If the second miss really got together with him, it would really be ruined in the future. Thinking of a past in the bottom of her heart, Madame Dong felt that she couldn't watch second miss fall into the same situation as her. She was too young at that time, So she was in such a difficult situation now. She was a lonely woman with a child. Only she knew the pain in it. Madame Dong, you don't think that I have anything to do with this child, Wen, do you? Qin Wanru looked at Nanny Dong in astonishment and laughed. I just appreciate Child Wen's talent. I didn't learn much in Jiangzhou, and it would be a good thing if I could learn from him. Looking at Qin Wanru's clear watery eyes without any ripples, Madame Dong was ashamed and shook her head embarrassedly. I thought too much. There was no shyness or affection in her clear watery eyes. Thinking of Qin Wanru's small body, Madame Dong blushed. She thought too much. Second Miss was such a little girl. What did she know? Since she understood that Qin Wanru didn't have any romantic thoughts, Madame Dong's answer should be much more straightforward. Child Wen said that if Second Miss has something you don't understand, you can go to Huaguang Temple to find him. In the first few days of every month, he will go to Huaguang Temple to try the Wenxin Road and play chess with the abbot. Huaguang Temple? Wenxin Road? It was also the beginning of the month. What a coincidence! Qin Wanru nodded and told Madame Dong something about the arrangement. She put forward her opinions for Madame Dong's reference and let Madame Dong make the final decision. After talking about this for a while, Qin Wanru walked out of the shop that was being decorated with Yujia. Yujia had already gone outside to call the carriage. Madame Dong sent them to the carriage before leaving. However, the carriage did not go directly back to the mansion. Instead, it went to the place where the servant in the clinic had reported the name. The coachman was found in the capital and was very familiar with this area. After a few twists and turns, they arrived in front of a small mansion. The mansion was not small, and it seemed to be a big family. However, the blue stone pavement outside was very old, and even the open space outside the mansion was almost gone. From the looks of it, it looked like a dilapidated mansion. Qin Wanru's carriage was parked on the side of the road. She slightly lifted the curtain and saw the two huge words, Ning's Mansion, on the gate of the mansion. The characters were strong and powerful, but there were some black lines in the golden glittering marks, which showed that the gold-plated characters were no longer as beautiful as they used to be. The inside of the mansion had been exposed. There was no one at the gate, but it seemed that someone was in the half-closed gate. Qin Wanru captured some traces in her memory and knew that this should be the place. She sat in the carriage and waited. Yujia wanted to ask something, but she shook her hand to stop her. She actually had a guess, but now she wanted to wait and see. If it was true, then she was really confused in the last life. Because there was no place outside the gate, and there were shops on the side, the carriage was not conspicuous. The gate of the mansion was very quiet. No one came in or came out. The gate of the mansion had been unclosed, and the scenery inside could not be seen. Qin Wanru looked around patiently. She was waiting. Chapter 196. The man helped a woman out of the carriage. She stood still in the carriage and seemed to say something to the man. At first glance, it could be seen that the two of them were very affectionate and seemed to have a lot to say. After standing there and talking for a while, the woman slightly turned her face to one side, looking quite delicate. The man seemed to want to leave, but the woman gently pulled his sleeves and didn't let him go. They seemed to say a few more words. When he wanted to speak again, the man was a little impatient, patted his sleeves, and was about to leave. But this time, he was pulled by the woman again. The woman tilted her head and whispered a few words in the man's ear. Although the expression on her face could not be seen clearly from the distance, her behavior and manner let people know that the woman was very shy at this time. After saying that, she covered her face and walked to the door of the mansion. The man behind her looked very happy and laughed. When the woman entered the door of the mansion, she looked back again, smiled sweetly, and then entered the door. The man watched the woman enter the door in a happy mood, and then got on the carriage with some reluctance. The carriage slowly set off and drove forward from the door of the mansion. When passing by Qin Wanru's carriage, people could see a man sitting in the carriage through the raised curtain. His appearance was not very outstanding, but he looked a little gentle, as if he were a gentleman. However, from the behavior just now, it seemed that he was not the slightest bit similar to the so-called upright ruler. Pulling and pulling with an unmarried woman in front of the residence, Even an engaged, unmarried man and woman would not do such a thing. However, the man and woman just now seemed to be very familiar with each other. It could be seen that this kind of behavior was not a day or two. In fact, these two people were not engaged. Qin Wanru stared at the window in a daze. The gentleman's face flashed by there, and her mind seemed to be tumbling with stormy waves, and her hand holding the handkerchief was cold. This was Wang Xingxue, whom she had been engaged to for the first time in her previous life. He looked like a gentleman. Although his face was not outstanding, his faint sense of righteousness made people feel that he was really a gentleman. This was also the reason why she agreed with Madame D in her previous life. He looked like a gentleman, but what he did was not what a gentleman should do. The woman just now was the real Ning Xueqing. In her previous life, she had always thought that Ning Xueqing was also a determined woman. Although she had some tricks, she did it for the love of her heart. Only now did he realize that it wasn't just that. She was actually such a flirtatious person. Even though she was from a declining aristocratic family, she was still an aristocratic family. As a young lady of an aristocratic family, she was actually pulling and tugging at a man's doorstep. Not only was her behavior ambiguous, her actions made people feel that she was clearly doing it on purpose. Furthermore, her concept of shame was weak. Such a shameless woman who would do anything for her own sake was Ning Xueqing. And the woman just now, if she guessed correctly, was Di Yan's good cousin, Ning Kaixian. She didn't know anything. It turned out that this was just another trap set by Madame D and her daughter for her in the previous life. It was just that there was another pair of sisters who harbored evil intentions in this game. Biting the corners of her lips tightly, she swallowed the blood surging in her heart, and her eyes were full of anger. In her previous life, she had just arrived in the capital city. Although she had a bad reputation, Jiangzhou was too far away, and Madame D and her daughter had the upper hand in the Qin's mansion. Even though most people thought that she was lowly, there were still some people who thought that she was just framed by Madame D. All aristocratic families had disputes in the backyard, and many people could see it clearly. So, there was this matter of breaking off the engagement. Senior Wang Xingxue was a righteous man. Letting such a person plot against her and force her to marry him, no one would think that Madame D had done anything wrong. Although his family background was not prominent, with such a reputation, what else could she ask for? It was good enough to have such a person marry her. As far as this marriage was concerned, no one could find fault with Madame D. But as a result, this time breaking off the engagement made her reputation in the capital city even worse, and it happened in the capital city. People had always been tolerant to men. Not to mention that Wang Xingxue had a bad character, they only said that she was not only lowly but also unlucky. It would not be good for anyone who was tainted by her. Even a person with a dignified character would become unbearable. Since then, after breaking off the engagement, no one in the capital city wanted to marry her, and then there was Madame D's second plot. The handkerchief in her hand was fiercely crumpled into a ball. "Miss." Yujia looked at Qin Wanru uneasily and asked cautiously. Exhaling a heavy breath, Yujia showed a faint smile on her face, but her eyes were full of strong anger. The kind of anger that almost came from the hell-made Yujia, who grew up in Jingxin Monastery since she was a child, so shocked that she couldn't speak for a while. "This is Duke Xing's nephew." Qin Wanru suppressed the coldness in her heart and said slowly, and the redness caused by the anger in her eyes faded slowly. What about that woman? Is this a place of prostitution?" Yujia had little contact with the secular world in Jingxin Monastery before. She had heard of but never seen a place of prostitution. But thinking of the woman's behavior just now, she felt it was a little similar, so she asked in confusion. But she also felt it was not very similar. At least the two words, Ning's mansion, on the handkerchief was a little different from the place of prostitution that pilgrims used to say. But it was also possible that the customs in the capital city were different from those in Jiangzhou. It is not a place of prostitution, but Ning's mansion. Qin Wanru slightly bent the corner of her mouth, and suddenly figured out the cause and effect of this part. Let the carriage go back. Since they had seen what they had seen, then they couldn't do whatever they wanted next. Yu Jie let the carriage go in a daze, and then looked at Qin Wanru with her eyes wide open, wanting to say something but stopping on second thought. Qin Wanru knew that Yu Jie was full of doubts now, so she leaned on the carriage and said slowly with cold and suspicious eyes, "The first Miss Ning before should be the one who has a good relationship with Di Yan. The Miss Ning later should be the one who has a close relationship with the nephew of Duke Xing just now." The two sisters of Ning's mansion were both such people. They were not only lowly, but also vicious. They would sacrifice everything of others for themselves. Therefore, the reason why Ning Kaixian could finally marry into Duke Yong's mansion in the last life, and the reason why Madame Di and Qin Yuru compromised, was because of her. Qin Wanru was very clear about Madame Di's character. Since Ning Kaixian would definitely marry into Duke Yong's mansion, she should at least see some benefits for herself, and she was the only reason why Qin Yuru treated Ning Kaixian kindly. As for Ning Xueqing, it was certainly a good thing that Duke Xing's mansion could recognize her on such an occasion and force Wang Xingxue to marry her. Otherwise, how could there be such a coincidence? If she had met Ning Kaixian in the last life, she would have figured out the key points, but she had never seen Ning Kaixian, so she certainly didn't know her name. She only knew that she was Di Yan's cousin, Ning, but she didn't expect that she was actually a pair of sisters with Ning Xueqing. The heavenly Tao returns and retribution comes. It was originally an unintentional action, but it unexpectedly allowed him to discover the truth that he had not discovered in his previous life. If she hadn't attracted the servant girl into the mansion that day, she was afraid that this matter would still go according to the traces of the last life. This cousin Ning Kaixian, who fought with Qin Yuru with wits and courage and had the upper hand, would finally marry into Duke Yong's mansion. In the end, in order to live a better life, she would definitely help Madame Di and Qin Yuru to plot against her. For this reason, Qin Yuru also promised that if she gave birth to a child, she would raise her to the position of a co-wife. After her rebirth, she suddenly figured out the things that she couldn't figure out. The Ning sisters each got what they wanted. What they had done was just to step on him in a more muddy place. In vain, he sighed for Ning Xueqing. Such a determined and infatuated woman turned out to be nothing more than a thin layer of cleanliness. When this layer was torn off, there was only dirt underneath. Since this first Miss Ning has a good relationship with the heir of Duke Yong, why would she deal with you? Shouldn't she deal with the first miss? Yu Jie didn't know who Ning Xueqing was, nor did she know who this nephew of Duke Xing's mansion was. She focused on Ning Kaixian. After listening to Qin Wanru's words, she thought for a while and asked in surprise. She should be guided by Madame Di. Qin Wanru raised the frost on her eyebrows, and her smile was like a sharp blade. Guided by Madame Di? Yu Jie blinked her eyes in confusion. After Nanny Zhou came back that day, nothing happened, did she? But she went to Duke Yong's mansion several times later and found that this delicate cousin sister of Madame Di might have an ambiguous relationship with Di Yan, but she didn't do anything. It's not like Madame Di's usual style. Qin Wanru said slowly in a low voice. Her words didn't sound high. It seemed that she was explaining to Yu Jie, but it also seemed that she was whispering. Yu Jie was not stupid. Hearing Qin Wanru's words, she suddenly widened her eyes and raised her voice unconsciously. Nanny Zhou must have made this cousin sister think that Miss is the key to her relationship with the heir of Duke Yong, so this cousin sister planned to deal with Miss? This cousin sister looks so delicate that she almost falls with a blow, but I didn't expect that she is such a vicious and selfish person. Qin Wanru was silent. The key to this was actually not difficult to figure out. In the last life, Madame Di could make use of Ning Zaixian's temperament, so she could certainly do it in this life. Nanny Zhou was a servant of Duke Yong's mansion, so she was very familiar with the affairs of Duke Yong's mansion. Even if Countess Yong's people didn't mention this matter, old Madame of Duke Yong's people would definitely expose this cousin sister. Since she grew up with Di Yan, it could not be hidden in Duke Yong's mansion. In the past, Qin Yuru didn't find out about this cousin sister because she didn't expect that Di Yan was disloyal to her, so she didn't investigate it. Therefore, this matter was one after another, a vicious plot layer upon layer. In the last life and this life, although things were different, the purpose was the same. Chapter 197. If Qin Yuru had known this, she would not have done it. In the last life, she had no choice but to let Ning Kaixian marry her. As for plotting against Qin Wanru with Ning Kaixian later, it was just the interest she wanted to get after she had no choice. Compared with winning the favor of Madame of Duke Xing, she could bear it. Anyway, it was a foregone conclusion that Ning Kaixian would marry into Duke Yong's mansion. Now Madame D knew this. Madame D wanted to deal with Qin Wanru, so she naturally used all the available resources. Since Ning Kaixian had an evil intention, how could Madame D not use such a woman? With Nanny Zhou's ability, Ning Kaixian would definitely deal with Qin Wanru by hook or by crook if she hinted to this cousin servant that Qin Wanru was an obstacle between her and Di Yan. Therefore, Ning Kaixian tried every means to enter the mansion to inquire about Qin Wanru's news and wanted to plot against Qin Wanru. Madame D's pawn, Qin Shui, came in handy. Qin Wanru was still young, and the people around her, whether Yu Jie or Qin Yu, were all loyal to her. Therefore, the only one she could deal with was Dong Xiu'er, who had a close relationship with her but had a weak mind. "Miss, what about Dong Xiu'er?" Yu Jie suddenly thought of something and said, "Nanny Dong is very loyal to Miss, and Dong Xiu'er is her only daughter." Qin Wanru lowered her head, and her eyes were cold. The carriage came to Ningyuan Army General's mansion. After entering through the side door, they arrived at the parking lot. After getting off the carriage, Qin Wanru went to Madame Dowager's Xinning Pavilion with Yu Jie. Before going out, she asked Qin Yu to ask for leave from Madame Dowager. Of course, she had to report to Madame Dowager after coming back. Coincidentally, she had something to ask Madame Dowager. Before arriving at Xinning Pavilion, she saw many screens placed outside the gate of the courtyard. They were of different shapes and sizes, but their heights were basically the same. She could not help but stop. A large group of servant girls were busy cleaning. A sharp-eyed servant girl found Qin Wanru and reported it to Nanny Duan. Nanny Duan came out to greet her. "So many screens. What's going on?" Qin Wanru looked at the screen in front of her in astonishment and asked in confusion. There were not so many screens in the mansion. Madame D borrowed these from Duke Yong's mansion. "We are going to hold a banquet in our mansion, but we don't have such a big living room." General and Madame Dowager discussed it and decided to hold the banquet in the garden. The weather has been good these days, so it's good to hold the banquet in the garden. There is a place in our mansion where osmanthus is planted, and the golden osmanthus smell is fragrant. It's a beautiful place. Nanny Duan wiped her sweat and continued, "But in the current weather, the windy place is still cold, so I want to make a space with a screen, which is both spacious and can enjoy the scenery." "These are all sent by Duke Yong's mansion?" Qin Wanru asked. She did not ask why they didn't send them to Shui Ruolin's yard. Since they were sent by Duke Yong's mansion, of course, they would not agree with Shui Ruolin. On the one hand, they sent them here to show Madame Dowager the power of Duke Yong's mansion, and on the other hand, they could show Duke Yong's mansion's attitude. It was killing two birds with one stone. "Yes, they are all sent by Duke Yong's mansion, but just now," Nanny Duan said helplessly. She pointed to a screen in the corner and said, "Just now I accidentally hit a corner. I'm afraid I'll be too embarrassed to stand up at that time." "Hit it? Was it caused by the people from Duke Yong's mansion who moved here, or by people from our mansion?" Qin Wanru's eyes flashed and she asked in a very orderly way. "I don't know either. It was so chaotic just now. The people they sent here left after putting them down, and then moved again. Our people were cleaning up. There are so many people coming and going, so I really don't know who hit it. But anyway, it happened in our mansion, so I'm afraid we have to trouble Madame D." Nanny Duan sighed. If there was one person that Madame Dowager didn't want to see the most, it would be Madame D. However, although it was a small matter, if it was someone else who showed up, Duke Yong's mansion might not look good, so they had to ask Madame D for help. Qin Wanru did not say anything and walked to the screen. This was a screen with 20% folding. The exquisite pictures on the screen were spring, summer, autumn, and winter. There were 2 pictures of each season, and they were very beautiful. Among the flowers, a beautiful woman was smiling, and her face was half covered. Among these screens, this screen could be regarded as the best, so it was no wonder that Madame Dowager was worried. Moreover, Madame D was now under house arrest, and Madame Dowager was very reluctant to let her go to Duke Yong's mansion. With her temperament, she was afraid that she would make trouble again and it would be hard to explain. The corner that was knocked off was on the upper right frame of the screen. The higher corner had been knocked off. Although it was still there, one could see the fracture at a glance. It was very obvious. This screen was obviously broken. Who in the aristocratic family would take out a broken screen to embarrass themselves? Qin Wanru reached out and touched the surface of the screen. She narrowed her eyes and thought of something. She asked, "Who sent the screen today?" "It's the heir of Duke Yong," Nanny Duan said. "Where is he now?" Qin Wanru asked. "When he came here, he went to pay respects to Madame D. At this time, I don't know whether he is at Madame D's or First Mrs. Place." Nanny Duan thought for a while and said, "She was very busy here, and Di Yen was a frequent visitor, so she did not ask too much about these things. I'll go to talk to Child D. If necessary, I will personally go to Countess Yong to ask for punishment," Qin Wanru said lightly. Nanny Duan was stunned and hurriedly stopped her. "Second miss, you'd better let Madame Dowager deal with this matter." She knew Madame D's malice towards Qin Wanru, and also knew that Duke Yong's mansion did not like Qin Wanru. If Qin Wanru really went to Duke Yong's mansion to ask for punishment, Countess Yong would definitely make second miss embarrassed. "Nanny Duan, it doesn't matter. Now I am not only the miss of Qin's mansion, but also the miss of Ningyun Army General's mansion." Qin Wanru smiled and said meaningfully. Her words made Nanny Duan silent for a while. Of course, she knew that Qin Wanru's point was the identity of Ningyuan Army General. Now Qin's mansion was indeed not only Qin's mansion, but also Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Even though it was not as famous as Duke Yong's mansion, no one knew what would happen next. At least as an official trusted by the emperor, she would not offend anyone at will. But, second miss, Duke Yong's mansion is not other mansions. Nanny Duan was still worried and reminded her. It was not that she looked down on Qin Wanru. After so many things, Nanny Duan no longer regarded second miss as a child who did not understand the world. But Duke Yong's mansion was Madame D's maiden family. Other mansions would not offend Ningyuan Army General's mansion, but Duke Yong's mansion might not. Nanny Duan, it doesn't matter. Moreover, she may not necessarily go to Duke Yong's mansion to ask for punishment in person. I'll go to the heir of the Duke and talk about this matter first. Qin Wanru smiled and comforted Nanny Duan. She had never encountered such a thing as a hard thing like the screen being knocked off a corner. If the screen was knocked off a little, it was possible to have scratches. If she was not careful, there would only be such a mistake. But now a corner was knocked off, which could not be caused by carelessness. It was easy to guess the thoughts of Duke Yong's mansion. It just so happened that she also wanted to go to Duke Yong's mansion to meet the delicate cousin Ning Kaisian, who often appeared in Duke Yong's mansion. Originally, she wanted to ask Madame Dowager some things about Duke Yong's mansion and see if there was a chance to meet Ning Kaisian. Unexpectedly, when she just arrived here, the opportunity was presented to her. Hiding the coldness in her eyes, she smiled gently at Nanny Duan. "Well, if it really doesn't make sense, second miss, you'd better report to Madame Dowager and then make a decision." Although Nanny Duan agreed, she was still worried and told Qin Wanru. "Nanny Duan, don't worry." Qin Wanru nodded and looked again at the broken corner of the screen. Then she turned and walked to her Jifeng pavilion with a calm face. Since she had decided to go out, she naturally had to go back to prepare and freshen up. After returning to Jifeng pavilion, Qin Wanru asked Nanny Yu and Qin Yu to find out the news of Di Yen, while she freshened up here. She let down her heavy forehead hair, which covered her delicate eyebrows and eyes. She combed her hair into 2 double-loop buns with 4 or 5 fancy hairpins. Her head was full of pearls and jade, which made her look like a butterfly. She picked out a water lotus color dress. She had been growing so fast recently that the clothes she made before seemed to be shorter. The day before yesterday, Madame Dowager had asked her to pick out a few sets of clothes, but she was still wearing the old clothes she had made before. They were a little short. Not only were the corners of the skirt shorter, but even the cuffs were shorter. With the long bangs on his face, he immediately looked dusty. He even felt that his whole body was greasy and dirty. In addition to his clothes, not only did he look inconspicuous, he also looked very slovenly. The Qin clan could be considered a new noble family. Was it really appropriate for them to dress like this? Miss, this actually doesn't look like you. Yujie looked at Qin Wanru, who was dressed up, and said eagerly. She felt that she had covered up Mrs. Peerless Beauty. It was really uncomfortable to sit up. This is good. Qin Wanru pulled her sleeves. Now she looked like an 11-year-old girl. The slightly loose clothes made her look like a little girl, but she still looked like a child when she dressed up like this. Not only did she look like a child, but she was also dusty, slovenly. It was really unpleasant to see. Coupled with the butterfly-like hairpin, she dressed up like a flower pot, full of aesthetic feeling, which was very painful to the eyes. Yujie felt that no matter who she saw, her eyes would hurt. Not only did she feel that her Mrs. behavior was weird, but she also looked like a little love-struck fool who didn't know how to dress up. But this appearance made Qin Wanru very satisfied. Looking at herself in the mirror, who was dressed strangely like a little love-struck fool, a smile appeared on her face. Very good, very annoying. Chapter 198. Qin Yu blinked and blinked again. She couldn't believe that it was her Mississippi. Where was her delicate and beautiful miss? She turned back and looked at Yujie eagerly. Yujie smiled at her helplessly and broke all her fantasies. This is Miss. Miss White, why are you so sad? You don't know how to dress up? Let me do it. Yujie's answer broke all Qin Yu's imagination. She looked at Qin Wanru with a sad face and said, she thought that Qin Wanru wanted to dress up prettily, but she didn't know how to dress up. That was why she looked like this. Isn't this good? Qin Wanru stretched out her hand and pulled her thick bangs aside a little so that she could see Qin Yu clearly. Such thick bangs not only hurt her eyes, but also blocked her view. Only in this way could Qin Yuru and even old Madam of Duke Yong rest assured. And first Miss Ning, she probably didn't expect that she looked so inconspicuous. Miss, this is not good. This is simply... Qin Yu didn't know how to describe it. She smacked her lips and couldn't say a word. If it wasn't Qin Wanru in front of her and she knew that she was her miss, Qin Yu was afraid that she would directly say, "What the hell is this? This is just right. I found child D. Where is he?" Qin Wanru smiled slightly and put down her heavy bangs. In the garden, he happened to meet First Miss Qi and they were talking. Qin Yu answered helplessly. He said that he was going to see First Miss, but he met First Miss Qi on the way, so they started talking. Ask a servant girl to find Dian and ask Qin Yuru if she knows that he went there. Qin Wanru looked up and said, based on Qin Yuru's character, she would definitely go to find Dian when she found out that he came and said that he was going to see her, but she hadn't seen him for a long time. How could she not be angry when she saw this scene? Yes, I will ask the servant girl to find him now. Qin Yu understood tacitly. She wiped the non-existent sweat on her forehead and turned to go out. Yujie, last time Nanny you said that there was a famous doctor in the capital city. Do you know where he is? Qin Wanru suddenly asked as she watched a servant girl leave in a hurry. Miss, I know where he is. Nanny Yu and I have been there before. Yujie was stunned for a moment and immediately nodded and said affirmatively. The reason why she remembered it so clearly was that Yujie had been there with Nanny Yu once. Let's go and have a look. Qin Wanru said slowly after calculating the time and realizing that Qin Yuru had already found Di Yen. Di Yen did come to deliver the screen today. He had also seen Madame Di and wanted to see Qin Yuru. He did not expect to meet Qi Rongji on the way, so he stopped and talked to Qi Rongji. The two of them had not seen each other for a period of time. When they spoke again, there was a sense of camaraderie. Although the two of them did not say anything, they had a tacit understanding that they had met in the garden. Di Yen was originally a playboy. He liked Qin Yuru because of her outstanding appearance. But after seeing her behavior several times, Di Yen inexplicably disliked her. Qi Rongji's appearance was similar to Qin Yuru's, and her behavior was gentle, just like when he first met Qin Yuru. She immediately occupied a big place in Di Yan's heart. While they were talking, a servant girl were sent to the side to see if anyone came. One was shy and the other was affectionate. It didn't feel like a long time had passed. When they were talking enthusiastically, Qi Rongji seemed to be waiting for Di Yan to say something. She moved her feet slightly, but she didn't expect to suddenly step on something. She slipped and fell. Di Yan subconsciously reached out to support her and held her hand. Although it was just a touch, Qi Rongji immediately blushed shyly. Di Yan seemed to feel that he was being rude, so he hurriedly bowed to her. Qi Rongji shook her head and seemed to want to say something. When they were being intimate, Qin Yuru appeared with her servant girl, Mei Shui. Seeing the scene in front of her, she almost exploded with anger and her whole body was trembling. She came in the direction of Di Yan's servant. Seeing Qin Yuru coming, she wanted to report to her son. But Qin Yuru glared at him as if she wanted to eat him. She stared at him until his legs became weak and he didn't dare to say anything. At this time, Qin Yuru came close. Di Yan and Qi Rongji were in the middle of affectionate love, so their vision and hearing were greatly impaired. When they saw Qin Yuru was already in front of them. Qin Yuru reached out and slapped Qi Rongji. She gritted her teeth and scolded, "Bitch! You bitch!" After saying that, she grabbed Qi Rongji's sleeve and pulled her to the ground. Seeing Qin Yuru, Di Yan was also startled. Just as he was thinking about how to explain, Qin Yuru had already lost her temper. When he came to his senses, he hurriedly grabbed Qin Yuru's hand and tried to pull her away from Qi Rongji's hand. In his anxiety, he exerted a lot of force. Qin Yuru cried out in pain and loosened her hand. "Cousin Yu, listen to me." Di Yan was so anxious that his face turned pale, and he hurriedly said, "You hit me because of this bitch?" Qin Yuru was so angry that her face turned blue. She pointed at Di Yan and said with hatred, "Sister Yuru, listen to me. I just happened to meet the son of a duke. It's really not what you think." Qi Rongji said with a face full of grievances. Her servant girl, Chun Yi, also ran over at this time and hurriedly held her up. "Bitch, bitch." Qin Yuru was so angry that she was about to explode. She thought that she did not see the scene of the two of them pulling each other. Although they let go of each other later, anyone who saw the affection between the two of them would know that something was going on. How could Qi Rongji have the cheek to say that to her? She took 2 steps forward and wanted to grab Qi Rongji's hair. Chun Yi hurriedly reached out to stop her. Qin Yuru grabbed Chun Yi's hair and pulled it hard. Chun Yi cried out in pain. Seeing that Qin Yuru was making a scene, Di Yan stepped forward and stood in front of Qi Rongji. He said to Qin Yuru sternly, "Cousin Yu, that's enough. Do you really want to let the whole mansion know? Even if there is something going on between him and me, it has nothing to do with you, right?" Although the matter between the two of them had basically been settled, it had not been made clear. Di Yan's words were reasonable. Qin Yuru was so angry that her body shook and she almost fainted. "Cousin." She pointed at Di Yan but could not say a word. Her face was so pale that there was not a trace of blood. "Well, Cousin Yu, there is really nothing going on between me and Miss Qi. I was going to see you. I met Miss Qi on the way and just had a few words with her. Why can't I say a few words to others?" Di Yan was also afraid that Qin Yuru was really angry and something bad would happen, so he quickly calmed down and explained. "There is really nothing going on with you?" Qin Yuru said almost word by word. "Cousin Yu, don't worry. I only have you in my heart. Don't you believe me? Even if there was something going on between you and that person in Qi's mansion, I still care about you, don't I?" Di Yan coaxed. This was Qin Yuru's weakness. Thinking of this, she remembered that Qi Rongji was Qi Tianyu's biological sister and knew everything that had happened in Jiangzhou. She immediately felt guilty. If the two of them really had a life-and-death fight, Qi Rongji would dare to say anything given her character. However, she was not willing to let the two of them go. Just now, she clearly saw that there was something going on between Qi Rongji and Di Yan. Biting her lip, she glared at Qi Rongji fiercely, wishing that she could scratch Qi Rongji's face. This bitch must have taken a fancy to Di Yan and that was why she seduced him. Her mind was full of Qi Rongji's mistakes, But it did not occur to her that if Di Yan was good, he would not have anything going on with Qi Rongji. Big sister, child Miss Qi, what's wrong with you? Qin Wanru's voice sounded at this awkward moment. Several people present turned to look at Qin Wanru. Seeing Qin Wanru's outfit, even though Qin Yuru was gnashing her teeth with hatred, she could not help but show a sarcastic smile on her face. Her agitated mood actually calmed down at this moment. Qin Wanru, this bitch, dressed like this. Could it be that she also wanted to seduce Di Yan? But this appearance made everyone want to vomit. Whenever she saw someone, her first thought was that someone was trying to seduce Di Yan. She had never thought in this direction before, but now that she had seen Qi Rongji's style, her mind was immediately filled with this idea. Di Yan stared at Qin Wanru dumbfoundedly and did not know what to say for a moment. He only felt that Qin Wanru in front of him was really a waste of her beautiful and exquisite appearance. Could she really meet people like this? Qi Rongji was also shocked, but she reacted quickly and immediately burst into tears. With a face full of grievance, she said, "Sister Wanru, I just made Sister Yuru misunderstand me. Sister Yuru is very angry. Please help me to persuade Sister Yuru. Miss Qi, you can solve your own problems. I have something to discuss with Child D." Qin Wanru casually glanced at them and said seriously. Unfortunately, her dress had nothing to do with the so-called serious color. Moreover, only a small part of her face was exposed, so her expression could not be seen clearly. Qin Yuru looked alert and sneered, "What do you want to discuss with my cousin? Do you also want to meet here by chance? Is that why you dressed up like this?" "Big sister, what are you talking about? There are guests in the mansion, so of course I have to dress up. How can I dress up like usual?" Qin Wanru glanced at Qin Yuru calmly. She and Qin Yuru did not get along well in the past, so there was no need to pretend to be sisters. Both Qi Rongji and Di Yan knew this, so they were not surprised when Qin Wanru said this. "This is what you look like? Not bad indeed." Qin Yuru sneered, but she felt satisfied. If Qin Wanru always dressed up like this, she would not be worried at all. Thinking of this, she turned to look at Qi Rongji. Now she had to worry about this bitch in front of her. Qin Wanru did not want to argue with Qin Yuru, but turned to Di Yan and said calmly, "Child, there is a broken screen. Can you please take a look at it and how to deal with it? There must be a rule." "What screen is broken?" Di Yan suddenly reacted and was stunned for a moment. "It is the screen that your mansion lent to our mansion. I don't know where one of the corners was broken, but it is at Grandma's place now. Let's go and have a look together and think about how to solve it." Qin Wanru said. Go, go, go." Di Yan only wanted to leave at this moment, so he said repeatedly. Then he turned and walked away, followed by Qin Wanru. Qin Yuru glared at Qi Rongji and followed. Chapter 199. This screen is Grandma's favorite. Di Yan had thought it was not a big deal, but when he saw the screen in front of him, his eyebrows twitched violently and he said helplessly, "This is indeed Grandma's favorite screen. When I went there last time, Grandma mentioned this screen. It seemed to belong to Grandma's family." Qin Yuru raised the corner of her mouth and looked at Qin Wanru with some sarcasm. "Second sister, this is not a small matter." She was still full of anger at this moment and didn't like everyone around her. Qin Wanru ignored Qin Yuru's sarcasm and looked at Di Yan. "Child, why don't I go with you to Duke Yong's mansion and explain this to old madam?" "This actually is not necessary." Di Yan hesitated and said, feeling that it was a fuss. "You'd better go. Otherwise, if Grandma gets angry, cousin will have to deal with it alone. We will also feel guilty." The more Qin Yuru looked at Qi Rongji who followed them, the angrier she became. But at this time, she could not drive her away. She rolled her eyes and hid the sarcasm on her face, pretending to help solve the problem. Di Yan fell silent. This matter would definitely be asked by Grandma. He looked at Qin Yuru and then at Qi Rongji, and suddenly felt a headache. He felt that it was better to leave for a while, so he nodded and said, "Okay." Since they decided to go to Duke Yong's mansion, Qin Wanru naturally had to go to express her apology. Qin Yuru said that she wanted to go back to see old Madam of Duke Yong and put in a good word for Qin Wanru, so of course she had to go. Di Yen did not say anything about this. He ordered the carriage outside and was ready to leave with the two sisters. He asked someone to bring back the screen with a broken corner. According to Di Yen, the broken screen was useless, but it was Grandma's favorite, so they had to bring it back. Qi Rongji was not convinced that she could not go, but she also knew that it would not be good if she went at this time. She stood aside helplessly and watched Di Yen leave with a gloomy face. She also saw Qin Yuru turn her head and smile sarcastically at her. She twisted the handkerchief in her hand fiercely, suddenly feeling that Di Yen might not be her best choice. Qin Yuru was the granddaughter of the old Madam of Duke Yong. It was impossible for the old madam to take a fancy to Qin Yuru. However, she was unwilling to let go of Di Yen. At least for now, Di Yen was the best person by her side. Moreover, Di Yen understood her very well. Although they did not say it explicitly, in fact, they understood each other. But what if old Madam of Duke Yong disagreed? Qi Rongji frowned tightly. She felt that she had to think about it carefully. In any case, she could not lose to Qin Yuru, the fickle bitch. Di Yen took Qin Yuru and her sister to the carriage, and the carriage went to Duke Yong's mansion. Along the way, Qin Yuru did not speak, nor did Di Yen. The atmosphere in the carriage was very dull, completely different from the way Qin Yuru used to talk to Di Yen in a sweet voice. Qin Wanru was very comfortable. She sat by the window and gently lifted the curtain to look at the scenery. It seemed that she was very curious about the streets and pedestrians outside the window. Since she didn't speak, neither did the other two. With what had happened just now as a barrier, Di Yen and Qin Yuru calmed down and didn't know what to say. But it didn't affect Qin Wanru. She was alone, and she didn't have to talk to Qin Yuru hypocritically. She felt good. The carriage stopped at the gate of Duke Yong's mansion. Di Yen jumped out of the carriage with a sullen face. Qin Yuru pursed her lips and followed him out of the carriage. Di Yen reached out to help her. Qin Yuru got out of the carriage with Di Yen. When she was about to stand up, she suddenly felt weak and fell toward Di Yen. "What's wrong?" Di Yen hurriedly held her and asked. "I hit my foot. It hurts." Qin Yuru held Di Yen's hand and stood still. She frowned, and one of her feet swayed as if it was hurt. "Can you walk?" Di Yen asked with concern on his face. Qin Yuru took a step forward and immediately cried out. Her frown deepened. She raised her face and looked at Di Yen pitifully. She looked at Di Yen and said, "Cousin, my feet hurt. Let me help you in." Di Yen thought for a while and reached out to hold Qin Yuru's hand. He was relieved. This delicate Qin Yuru was the cousin sister he knew in the past. Qin Yuru said softly. She leaned half of her body on Di Yan's and let him help her into the mansion. Qin Wanru followed them out of the carriage. She looked at the two people in front of her who were leaning on each other. Her lips curved slightly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She slowly followed them into the mansion. At this time, Qin Yuru certainly knew that it was best to show weakness. The reason why she could hold Qi Tianyu in her hand was not only because she was strong, but also because she always knew how to take the next step to gain more benefits. It was just that in her previous life, Ning Kaixian seemed to be an expert in this field, so Qin Yuru was defeated. When the three of them entered the mansion, they saw the heir of Duke Yong with cousin Mississippi. Someone had already reported to the old madam of Duke Yong. Therefore, when Qin Wanru followed Di Yen and Qin Yuru into the courtyard of the old madam of Duke Yong, old madam of Duke Yong was not surprised to see Qin Wanru. But she was surprised at Qin Wanru's dress. After looking up and down at Qin Wanru's dress, old madam smiled gently, but a trace of sarcasm flashed in her eyes. As expected, Qin Wanru was from the countryside. How could she think she was beautiful dressed like this? How shameful! Looking at Qin Wanru and Qin Yuru, old madam became more and more satisfied. Her granddaughter was the best. Looking at her appearance and dress, she knew that she was a well-educated miss from an aristocratic family. After all, she was taught by her daughter. Even compared with those misses from aristocratic families in the capital city, she was not inferior. In contrast, the old madam of Duke Yong was very satisfied, so she was very kind to Qin Wanru. After asking about old Madam Qin's recent situation, she asked about her illness with concern and whether she was not acclimatized to the climate. She also asked old Madam Qin to come to Duke Yong's mansion if there was a chance. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. It seemed that they only met once when Madame D got married. After the greetings, they talked about what had happened before. Qin Wanru stood up with a guilty look and bowed deeply to the old Madam of Duke Yong. "Thank you, old Madam, for borrowing the screen in our mansion. But I don't know which family member did it seriously and knocked off the corner of one of the screens. I heard from the heir of Duke Yong that it was old Madam's favorite screen. Wanru specially came to apologize to old Madam and is willing to compensate your mansion according to the price." After saying that, Qin Wanru bowed deeply again with a very thoughtful etiquette. "What screen?" Old Madam was stunned for a moment and didn't understand. She turned to Di Yen and asked, "It's the screen of 4 seasons that Grandma liked the most. The one with 8 screens in total." Di Yen explained. "When was this screen taken there?" Old Madam's face changed slightly and became gloomy. She turned around and said to an old maid beside her. The old maid answered and went out. After a while, she came in and whispered a few words in old Madam's ear. Old Madam's face became more and more gloomy. But when he turned his eyes to Qin Wanru, he calmed down and sighed softly. "Forget it. You didn't break it on purpose. I thought that this screen was not taken out. It was sent by my maiden family when I married into Duke Yong's mansion. It has been precious for so many years. Who would expect that the supervisor who sent it to Duke Yong's mansion was not clear about it and took this screen to Duke Yong's mansion? And a corner of it was broken. In other words, he had broken someone else's precious item. Old Madam, Grandma wants to make the screen more beautiful and follow the original frame. So I want to ask Old Madam, where else can such a frame be found now? Grandma just came to the capital city and doesn't know these," Qin Wanru said. "This..." Old Madam hesitated. "Grandma, just say it. Since Grandma said so, if you don't say it, it will seem that our mansion is too stingy." Qin Yuru sat beside old Madam of Duke Yong's mansion, reached out to pull her sleeves and said in a spoiled manner, "I'm afraid it's gone now. The frame from so many years ago is different now." Old Madam of Duke Yong reached out to touch Qin Yuru's hair and said helplessly, "Then there must be the best frame now. Make one." Qin Yuru was trying to please old Madam. Of course, she would say anything nice. Before Qin Wanru could say anything, Qin Yuru interrupted her and put on a look as if she could make the decision. "Forget it. Old things are old things. In fact, it's not about the value," Old Madam said with a smile. It meant that the price of such old things was higher than the sky and could not be compared with the general market price. Qin Wanru was speechless. In this way, it seemed that Qin's mansion was in the wrong. "Old Madam, I have to take a look at it. Maybe it's possible to have such a framework now. Why don't you let me take a look at it again and then find something similar on the street?" Qin Wanru said respectfully, with a sincere intention to compensate for this thing. "This is still..." Old Madam thought for a while and wanted to refuse, but was interrupted by Qin Yuru, who shook her hand. "Grandma, let me and my second sister take a look. Maybe there is really a similar one." "Okay." Old Madam's eyes flashed and she nodded. Just now, the old maid had reported that the screen had been brought over and was placed in the yard. Qin Wanru and Qin Yuru came to the yard and carefully observed the corner of the screen. Qin Wanru even reached out to touch it. While touching, she casually asked Di Yen beside her, "Child, do you have such a similar screen in your mansion? The color of the 4 seasons is brighter?" I really didn't pay attention to it." Di Yen shook his head. He usually did not pay attention to these things. "I heard from Grandma that there is a cousin in your mansion. I don't know if she knows the latest frame in the capital city now." Qin Wanru lowered her head, as if she just said it casually. Chapter 200. Cousin, is there another cousin in your mansion? Qin Yuru raised her head and looked at Di Yen. She tried to pretend to be indifferent and asked. She had been in the capital city for a while, but she didn't see any cousin in Duke Yong's mansion, so she naturally wouldn't ask about it. "No, she left a long time ago. Di Yan's heart skipped a beat. He looked away guiltily and pretended to carefully examine the broken screen frame. Left? When did she leave? Qin Yuru's intuition told her that there was something wrong. She was suspicious, but she still smiled. Di Yan coughed in a low voice. Before you came, she had something to do at home and left. She left before I came. Why didn't I know? At this time, Qin Yuru was sure that there was something wrong. Although the jealousy in her heart couldn't be extinguished, the look on her face became more and more gentle. It's not a big deal. When she came to see my mother occasionally, she stayed for a day or two and then left. Di Yan felt more and more uncomfortable. He knew his own affairs. There was definitely something between him and Ning Kaixian. Countess Yong had always wanted to marry Ning Kaixian. Although Ning Caishian's family was not as good as Duke Yong's mansion, she was related to Countess Yong by blood. If Ning Kaixian married into Duke Yong's mansion, it would be good for her. At least they would be of the same mind. Since Countess Yong married into Duke Yong's mansion, she had been restricted by old madam of Duke Yong's mansion in every way and was very dissatisfied. If Ning Kaixian married into Duke Yong's mansion, she would be closer to Countess Yong. For this reason, Countess Yong wholeheartedly wanted to matchmake Ning Kaixian and Di Yan. But this was opposed by old madam. Previously, Qin Yuru had been in Jiangzhou, so Countess Yong let Ning Kaixian live in the mansion from time to time to accompany Di Yan. Ning Kaixian naturally seized this opportunity to please Countess Yong, and at the same time, she was affectionate with Di Yan. This was going to happen, but unexpectedly, Ning Caishian's elder passed away. This matter was delayed deliberately by old madam. Later, old madam said that Ning Caishian's horoscope did not match Di Yan's and proposed to marry Qin Yuru. After being reprimanded by old madam, Countess Yong had no choice but to express her intention to marry Madame Di of Jiangzhou. Later, when Qin Yuru went to the capital city, it was inconvenient for Ning Kaixian to appear in Duke Yong's mansion. When everyone in Qin's mansion went to the capital city and Qin Yuru returned to Qin's mansion, Ning Kaixian would occasionally stay in Duke Yong's mansion for one night or visit Countess Yong from time to time. Unfortunately, Qin Huaiyong became Ningyuan army general again and was also a close minister of the emperor. Even though his official rank was not high, his identity as the vice commander of the Imperial Guards camp still elevated his status. Ning Caishian's status had long fallen far behind Qin Yuru's and could no longer be compared with her. In this case, Countess Yong has no choice but to give up her intention to marry Ning's mansion. But Ning Kaixian was unwilling. She secretly continued to hold Di Yan's hand, and they were very affectionate. Of course, all this was done in secret. On the surface, Ning Kaixian was only Countess Yong's niece and Di Yan's cousin. The relationship between Di Yan and Ning Kaixian was almost recognized at that time. Many people in the mansion knew it. But Qin Yuru didn't ask, and people in the mansion didn't dare to ask. Of course, they all kept their mouths shut. Why didn't I meet her? Qin Yuru smiled sweetly. She hid the darkness in her eyes and was full of curiosity. Maybe something happened in her mansion. After all, she belongs to someone else's mansion. She can't always live in our mansion. Di Yan said impatiently. He got up and looked at the screen a few times. Then he turned and walked into the room. When Ning Caishian's matter was mentioned, he was very annoyed. At this time, he didn't know how to deal with it. He felt that both sides were good. He and Ning Kaixian had been friends since childhood. Even though she was not as beautiful as Qin Yuru, she had been gentle and obedient to him since childhood. The two of them had been in love with each other since a long time ago, and they had pledged their undying love to each other. But Qin Yuru was also very good. Not only was she beautiful, but she also had a good family background, which would be helpful to him in the future. Actually, he wanted both of them. Seeing Di Yan walk into the room, Qin Yuru's face darkened, and her eyes were cold. She gritted her teeth, looked back at Qin Wanru, and asked in an unfriendly tone, "How do you know that there is a cousin living in my cousin's mansion? Big sister doesn't know about it? Grandma said that everyone in Duke Yong's mansion knows about it. Nanny Duan came to Duke Yong's mansion once and occasionally heard a few servants talking about it. It should be something that everyone in the mansion knows." Just now, I suddenly thought of changing the frame of the screen, and naturally, It should be changed to a new one. This cousin is about the same age as big sister, so she certainly knows the fashionable things in the capital city. So I want to ask her about it. Qin Wanru patted the frame beside her hand, took 2 steps back, and said while looking at the frame carefully. Yu Jie gave her a handkerchief. She picked it up casually and wiped her hands. Then she said to Qin Yuru, who had a gloomy face, "Big sister, let's go in. We have to do a good job with the framework, otherwise it will be our fault." "You go in." Qin Yuru was not in the mood to flatter old madam at this time. Thinking that Di Yen had a cousin by his side, and everyone in the mansion knew about it, but she did not know it at all, she felt uncomfortable. Suddenly, she thought of the scene between Di Yen and Qi Rongji. Qi Rongji had just arrived in Qin's mansion, and Di Yen did not have many opportunities to meet her, but they had already been so affectionate. This so-called cousin had lived in Duke Yong's mansion for a period of time, and had a closer relationship with Di Yen. Something might have happened between them. "Big sister, don't you go in?" Qin Wanru was about to step forward. Hearing Qin Yuru's words, she looked back at her with confusion. "I have something to do," Qin Yuru said forcefully, turned around and walked out of the courtyard. She had lived in Duke Yong's mansion for a period of time, so she was naturally familiar with it. Walking out of the courtyard, she thought for a while and went to Di Yan's courtyard. She remembered that Di Yan had 2 servant girls. She did not like them in the past and thought they were all evil. She had long planned to send them away when she married into Duke Yong's mansion. But this time, she gave them a chance to atone for their sins. Seeing Qin Yuru leave with a cold face, Qin Wanru smiled slightly and then re-entered the room. After bowing to Old Madam, she said, "Old Madam, if you can't find the original frame, can you use the latest frame in the capital city?" Old Madam had said that she did not need to care about it, so she would certainly not embarrass Qin Wanru at this time. She nodded immediately. Since the matter had been solved, Qin Wanru naturally had to leave. After bowing to Old Madam again, she left with Yu Jie. Di Yen did not intend to go to Qin's mansion, so he did his duty as a master and sent Qin Wanru out. When he arrived at the gate of the mansion, he looked around and did not find Qin Yuru. His face changed slightly and he asked the servant beside him, "Where is Cousin Yu?" "I don't know. I saw Cousin Miss go out of the courtyard before," the servant said blankly. "Let's go." Di Yen hurried back. But he met Qin Yuru halfway. Seeing Qin Yuru's calm face, Di Yen was relieved and hurriedly greeted her. "Cousin Yu, where did you go just now? I thought you were waiting at the gate of the mansion." "I went to the courtyard where I lived before and bought some things on the street when I was here before. I was in a hurry when I went back to the mansion and forgot to bring them with me," Qin Yuru said with a smile. Although she secretly gritted her teeth in her heart, she did not show it on her face. That bitch and her cousin had been in love with each other for a long time. Moreover, they once said that one of them would marry no one but her, and the other would not marry no one but her. Although the matter between Qin Yuru and Di Yen was still a little uncertain before, it was settled after Qin Huaiyong's appointment. The 2 servant girls also knew that Qin Yuru would be their mistress in the future. Hearing Qin Yuru's question, of course, they would not hide the matter of Ning Kaixian. Not only did they tell the matter between Ning Kaixian and Di Yen, but also said that Ning Kaixian had sent someone to Qin's mansion to find Di Yen, saying that she was ill, and invited Di Yen to Ning's mansion. It was said that Miss Ning was very delicate. When she talked with Di Yen, she even fainted out of grievance. The reason why the 2 servant girls knew about this was that Di Yen had sent someone to his courtyard to get a few good ginsengs for the delicate Miss Ning. And the 2 servant girls also said that they had seen this delicate cousin falling into the arms of the heir several times. Whenever she thought of what the 2 servant girls said, Qin Yuru almost gritted her teeth to pieces. But she also knew that she could not directly lose her temper at this time. What happened to Qi Rongji previously almost made Di Yen unhappy. "Oh, do you need anything else? You also bought some and put them at my place." At this time, Di Yen only wanted to send Qin Yuru away. How could he refuse? Put them at cousin's place. Seeing Di Yan's expression, Qin Yuru became more and more resentful. Her hand holding the handkerchief clenched fiercely, but her face remained relaxed. Okay, then I will send cousin out. Cousin Wanru should have left now. I will send another carriage to send you. Dian said warmly. Thank you, cousin. Qin Yuru said softly. Don't mention it. Cousin Yu's business is my business. The delicate Qin Yuru was the most attractive to Dian. Coupled with her delicate face, Dian said affectionately. He reached out and gently held Qin Yuru. For a moment he felt a little reluctant to part with her. Cousin, let's go. Qin Yuru was shy under his gaze. She blushed and pushed him lightly. Good, good, good. Dian was so mesmerized that he couldn't stop mumbling. The two of them talked reluctantly for a while before Qin Yuru got on the carriage of Duke Yong's mansion. Then the carriage turned and left Duke Yong's mansion. But it did not go to Qin's mansion. Instead, it turned in another direction on the street and went to the Ning's mansion that the two servant girls told Qin Yuru about. Chapter 201. When Qin Yuru's carriage arrived in front of Ning's mansion, she did not get off the carriage directly. She sat in the carriage and looked up and down at the desolate scene of Ning's mansion, with a bit of sarcasm on her face. How could a girl from such a shabby place be a lady from a good family? How could she call herself cousin Miss? She was just a poor family. What she did not notice was that another carriage was parked among several carriages at the corner. Qin Wanru sat in the carriage, slightly lifted the window, and looked at the gate of Ning's mansion. Qin Wanru had known that Qin Yuru would not swallow this, so she naturally waited here to watch the fun. Since Ning Kaixian planned to plot against her, she should not blame her for being rude. Go, tell them to see the first miss of their mansion. Qin Yuru said to Mei Shui. Yes, miss. Mei Shui got off the carriage and went to the gate of the mansion with a straight face. She shouted to the family members who came out, Is your first miss here? Our first miss is in the mansion. Or you. The person at the gate did not know Mei Shui. He looked her up and down and asked in confusion. I am the servant girl of Duke Yong's mansion. Our heir has something to ask your first miss to come out. There is something for your first miss, Mei Shui said with a smile. Since the heir wants to give it to our first miss, why doesn't he bring it in directly? Why does he ask our first miss to come out? The servant at the gate was puzzled. In the past, whatever child D wanted to give, he would send it directly. Why did he hesitate to ask his first miss to come to the gate to pick it up? Slap. Mei Shui slapped the gatekeeper in the face. Our heir means that as a servant, why do you ask so much? It must be something important and must be given to your first Mississippi. Go and report it. Yes. The gatekeeper dared not say anything after being slapped. They were just at desolate Ning's mansion, so what could they say? Although Child D's attitude had been very good in the past, it was hard to guarantee that he was in a bad mood today. The gatekeeper did not dare to ask more and hurriedly ran back to report. Mei Shui returned to the carriage. After reporting to Qin Yuru, she stood beside the carriage. The gatekeeper came back very quickly. After coming out, he ran to the front of the carriage and said to Mei Shui with a flattering smile, Our first miss will come out soon, but she is weak and will walk slowly. Please wait. So slow. Mei Shui frowned and scolded him for being unreasonable. Sure enough, after waiting for a long time, he saw Ning Kaixian coming slowly with a maid. Every step she took was extremely delicate, like a willow in the wind. Sitting in the carriage, Qin Yuru had a clear look at her. She was not as good-looking as Qin Yuru. She looked miserable, but her eyes looked affectionate and delicate, which made her angry. She was indeed a coquettish bitch. Qin Yuru's eyes were almost spewing fire. This bitch used to regard herself as the future female master of Duke Yong's mansion. It is said that she once beat the two servant girls. What a joke! Cousin, why don't you come in? Ning Kaixian walked to the front of the carriage, raised her head, and said shyly. She couldn't think of any reason why Dian would ask her to take things by herself. Thinking that Dian must be playing with her, she walked over and looked at the carriage in a coquettish manner, waiting for Dian to suddenly jump off the carriage. Mei Shui lifted the curtain, and Qin Yuru jumped off. Ning Kaixian's face changed dramatically, and she took 2 steps back. Looking at Qin Yuru, who looked gloomy, she knew that the situation was not good. But before she could retreat to a safe place, Qin Yuru had already rushed over and slapped her hard twice. She took a few steps back and fell heavily on the ground. The maid who followed her was so shocked that she almost fainted. She rushed over to help her and screamed, first miss, bitch, you look delicate and weak. Who would have thought that you're actually so despicable? You actually hooked up with the steward of our mansion. Moreover, you couldn't bear the loneliness and came to our mansion to look for someone. Fickle bitch. Qin Yuru walked over and kicked Ning Kaisian, who fell on the ground, so hard that Ning Kaisian almost fainted. When she heard Qin Yuru's name clearly, her face immediately turned red. Nonsense. Who are you? I don't know you. Of course you don't know me. You have an affair with the steward of our mansion. Have you ever thought that the steward of our mansion also has a wife? Moreover, she is the steward of our inner court. You bitch, how can you be so despicable? Qin Yuru raised her head and sneered coldly. How can you be so despicable? You, what nonsense are you talking about? Ning Kaisian also came to her senses at this moment. She screamed angrily and stood up with the help of her maid, her face livid. Am I talking nonsense? Do you want me to find a few people to confirm that your maid deliberately came to my mansion to find a man? You look like a lady from an aristocratic family, but what you have done is really disgusting. Even if your Ning's mansion has declined, you don't have to be so despicable. Qin Yuru came prepared. She took out a hairpin from her sleeve and shook it in her hand. Look, I have your hairpin as proof. Your name is printed on it. I don't think Kai Liu refers to you, right? This hairpin was found secretly in Di Yan's room by two servant girls. It was indeed Ning Caishien's. She deliberately left it in Di Yan's room. Now it was in Qin Yuru's hand, which was the evidence. They had made such a big noise that it had attracted a lot of people. There was no place in the Ning's mansion, and there were shops on the side. Such a big noise immediately gathered a large group of people. Originally, people thought it was a little unbelievable that a lady from an aristocratic family seduced a steward. Even the steward of a big mansion was a servant. Although the Ning's mansion had declined, she was still a lady and her status was different from that of ordinary people. However, after seeing Qin Yuru take out this hairpin and Ning Caishien's pale face, everyone actually believed it. For a while, the crowd was talking about Miss Ning Kaisien. She looked like a noble lady in daily life, but unexpectedly she was such a woman. Some local ruffians were also here, and some even talked lewdly to Ning Kaisien, treating her as a prostitute in a brothel. Ning Caishien's face turned blue and then white. Until now, she still had not figured out who came and why they suddenly dealt with her. It was impossible for her to have an affair with the steward. At most, she seduced Di Yan. Originally, Countess Yong wanted Di Yan to marry her. Why should she let the miss of Qin's mansion marry him? Ning Kaisien was dissatisfied, so she tried to seduce him. She even worried that he would always live in the Qin's mansion, so she specially sent a servant girl to guard him at the door. Unexpectedly, when the servant girl sneaked to Di Yan's mansion to find him, she was caught by the people of the Qin's mansion and even led them to her. Ning Kaisien was anxious and flustered. Fortunately, the old maid of the Qin's mansion was very easy to talk to. She only said that she could marry into Duke Yong's mansion, but said that it was the second miss of the Qin's mansion who was really obstructing this matter. She said that the second miss had a good relationship with Di Yan and wanted to marry into Duke Yong's mansion together. If the second miss married into Duke Yong's mansion, she would not want her even if she was a concubine. If it was only a word from the old maid, Ning Kaisien did not quite believe it. But she remembered that Di Yan once said in front of her that among all the misses from aristocratic families in the capital city, the second miss of Qin's mansion was the most beautiful. At that time, she paid attention to it. Now that she compared the words of the old maid, how could she let go of the second miss of the Qin's mansion? She immediately thought of ways to deal with her. The hairpin she got from the Qin's mansion had now been sent to a local ruffian. When the time was right, she would directly ask someone to ruin the reputation of the second miss of the Qin's mansion. She would say that the second miss of the Qin's mansion had an affair with a local ruffian and gave him the hairpin, which had the word Qin on it. Unexpectedly, Before she started her plan, someone came to the door with her hairpin. In a flash, Ning Kaisian actually knew who the person in front of her was. Looking at Qin Yuru's beautiful face, she felt that she immediately understood. Second Miss Qin, do you know what the crime of framing others is? Ning Kaisian was so angry that her whole body trembled. If she had known that the second miss of the Qin's mansion was not an easy person to deal with, she would have acted faster and directly ruined her reputation. She was not cruel enough and missed the opportunity. Now she came to find her first. Ning Kaisian was angry and resentful, feeling that she was not vicious enough. Second Miss Qin? You are really a blind bitch. How did my second sister offend you? Why do you slander her like this? Qin Yuru sneered. Ning Caishian's pupils contracted, and she immediately knew that she had guessed wrong. The person in front of her was actually the first miss of the Qin's mansion, who was supposed to be engaged to Di Yan. For a moment, she was confused, stepped back, and almost fell into the arms of her servant girl. Her face was as white as snow. First Miss Qin, you? Why do you frame me like this? Did I frame you? You behaved inappropriately and gave a hairpin to the supervisor of our mansion casually. You even came to the door to get a man. Why don't you dare to admit it? Do you want someone in our mansion to prove that your servant girl has been here? With the information from the two servant girls, Qin Yuru was now very confident. She sneered and put a basin of dirty water on Ning Kaisian. The anger she had suffered from Qi Rongji before was all vented on Ning Kaisian. She looked Ning Kaisian up and down, and her eyes were full of contempt. What? You dare to do it, but you dare not to say it? You are so old, but you still don't get married. Is it because you want to pay the price? Ning Kaisian was older than Di Yan. Originally, she was going to be engaged to Di Yan, but because old madam did not agree and she was in mourning, it was delayed. You are too much. Is it because of my cousin? I gave this hairpin to my cousin, and I went to Duke Yong's mansion to look for him. I was going to be engaged to Duke Yong's mansion, but because of you, my cousin, said he wanted to marry you. But even so, you should not ruin my reputation. Ning Caishian's face was pale, and her eyes were full of despair. Looking at Qin Yuru, 2 lines of tears fell from the corners of her eyes. After saying that, she rolled her eyes and fell backward. The servant girl hurriedly held her. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.